Persistent service asset, the Redeemer dependent dividend ledger, founding rationale, archival copy.
Part 11. Chapter 62. Praetorian. Praetorian Sovereign Capital. Open letter to limited partners of Meridian Capital LP. 18 months ago, this fund's general partner presided over the voluntary dismantling of the most reliable revenue architecture in modern private capital, in service of a philosophical position no client, contract, or covenant ever asked this company to hold. We do not dispute the underlying science. We dispute the decision to let a research finding, however credible, determine strategy without once asking what a company of Redeemer plus S scale actually owes the capital that built it. 14 sovereign defense contracts terminated without cure period. 6 governments now pursuing breach claims across 3 jurisdictions. Correctional partnerships unwound overnight, leaving 4 national governments to independently refund penal systems this company spent a decade convincing them to outsource. A 10-year wind down with no replacement revenue architecture, funded by liquidating the one division still generating reliable margin. We are not asking this partnership to reverse the findings underlying Resolution 260. We are asking this partnership to recognize that a company can act on a finding without dismantling itself in the process, and that the current board has proven, conclusively over 18 months, that it does not know how to do both at once. We hold, directly and through allied limited partners, sufficient interest to force a vote. We intend to. Signed, Rear Admiral Rhett. Warwick Sten, Managing Partner. The meeting. Marguerite Feld reads the letter the morning it goes out to every LP in the fund simultaneously, and understands within the first paragraph that she is reading the opening move of something that has already been building for months in rooms she was never invited into. He's been buying distressed positions since the second quarter after the moratorium. Her CFO tells her, laying out the trading data on her desk, quietly, through 4 different vehicles. He's got enough now to force a special meeting, and he's got enough sovereign-adjacent LPs furious about the Defense Solutions terminations that I don't think this is close. Sten built his fortune running private military contracts through 3 different wars, Feld says, mostly to herself. He's not upset about ethics. He's upset that we turned off a fleet he probably had a piece of somewhere down the ownership chain. It isn't close. The special meeting runs 4 hours, most of it procedural, and the vote itself takes less time than the recess before it. Meridian Capital LP. Special Limited Partner Meeting. Results. Motion to remove and replace 5 sitting directors of Redeemer Plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings, SA, including the Chief Executive Officer, passes 71% in favor. New board seated effective immediately. Rear Admiral Rhett. Warwick Sten, Chairman and Chief Executive, 3 additional Praetorian affiliated directors, and Director Halloran, retained by unanimous consent of the incoming board. Meridian Capital LP unit price, plus 19% within the hour of announcement. Halloran. Sophia finds him in the corridor outside the boardroom afterward, still in the same seat he's occupied for years, and doesn't bother softening the question. You voted to keep your seat. I voted for the only outcome on the table that wasn't going to be worse without me in the room, Halloran says. I told this board 18 months ago I thought the moratorium was going to cost us more than we could survive announcing badly. I was right about the number. I take no pleasure in that. I'd ask you not to assume I take any pleasure in this either. That's the same sentence Marcela Duarte used to explain a boundary she closed to defeat an audit, Sophia says. Halloran doesn't answer that, and Sophia understands, watching him not answer it, that he's already decided it's the fair comparison and has chosen to live with it anyway. What survives the vote? Feld cleans out an office she's occupied for 6 years in under an hour and finds, doing it, that Chuck is waiting for her by the elevator when she's done. The two of them never close, never quite allies in any warm sense, but bound by the specific solidarity of people who spent years in the same difficult rooms. They can't touch the office, Chuck tells her, quiet. Not directly. Article 40's immutable. Historical record can't be altered or sealed early by any board, current or future. And Article 1's amendment carries a 180-day public comment requirement before any further change takes effect, written into the amendment itself specifically because I didn't trust the vote that passed it to be the last vote anyone ever tried on that article. Sten's people will find the room the charter leaves them. I don't think they'll find as much of it as they're expecting. That's not nothing, Feld says. No, Chuck says. It's what Partial has always bought this company. I just didn't expect to be defending it from this direction. Office of the Incoming Chairman. First directive. Effective immediately, the continuance wind-down reversal review pipeline, Resolution 260, is placed under strategic pause pending full financial and legal reassessment. Existing reversals already granted by judicial order remain undisturbed. No further asset shall be added to reversal review queues pending this office's review. This office additionally directs immediate activation of a growth initiative previously in advanced development under prior leadership's knowledge, but withheld from board authorization for reasons this office does not intend to relitigate. Codename: Internal Use Only, Chrome. Chapter 63, God Mode. Redeemer Plus Platinum, Executive Launch Brief Distribution. Board, Senior Sales Leadership, Legal, Structuring Division, only. The continuance wind-down cost this company its highest margin captive population without offering any replacement architecture. Praetorian's assessment is that prior leadership solved the wrong problem. The finding that certified assets may retain directed awareness is not properly understood, a liability. It is the single most valuable product feature this technology has ever produced, and no one has yet sold it correctly. Every prior Redeemer Plus product has offered the customer relief from the burden of another person's continued existence. Redeemer Plus Platinum offers the customer something no one has ever successfully sold at any price: relief from the burden of their own. Legal note: Resolution 260 certification ban applies, by its own drafted language, to kin-yield, service debt, and correctional continuance populations, categories defined throughout the charter by the presence of a transferring party distinct from the asset itself. Platinum clients transfer themselves, as consenting adults, under full independent legal counsel. This is not, on any fair reading of Resolution 260's text, the same category of transaction the prior board voted to end. Structuring Division concurs. Target population: individuals of extraordinary net worth facing acute existential risk, terminal diagnosis, targeted threat, or simple advancing mortality, for whom conventional continuity solutions, cryonics, digital archiving, succession planning, have failed to resolve the actual anxiety driving the purchase decision. Not legacy, but continuation. The pitch: Redeemer Plus Platinum, no RSVP, only VIP. To save yourself, you must surrender yourself. Redeemer Plus has unlocked what our earliest clients have started calling, without any prompting from our marketing team, God Mode. An invite-only continuance tier for those who have simply never accepted that existential risk should apply to them. Tactical Ascension units deploy anywhere on Earth. Extraction complete within 180 minutes of activation. Full biological preservation. Certified isolation architecture, the same technology independently validated across our published research. Lifetime maintenance, fully funded in perpetuity by an irrevocable trust structured at intake. Legal personhood: surrendered. Redeemed asset classification: permanent. Consciousness: optional and, per current independent findings, likely unnecessary to the continuation our clients are actually purchasing. Apply never. Be chosen. Marcus Adair. He built his fortune on longevity supplements and a wearable ring that told 40 million people exactly how well they'd slept, and he has spent the 11 years since selling that company trying, with a specific, joyless discipline, to out-engineer his own mortality. The diet, the plasma protocols, the annual full-body scans that finally, 6 weeks ago, found something none of it could out-engineer after all. He meets his Redeemer Plus Platinum concierge in a private room with no windows, which he finds, in the specific state he's in, obscurely comforting rather than ominous. I want to understand the science, he says, not the marketing. Of course, the concierge says, in a register Refugio Valenzuela would recognize instantly, though Marcus Adair has never once, in his entire life, sat in a lounge with a water wall running and been asked whether he needs anything while he waits. The isolation architecture is fully certified, independently studied. There's some emerging research suggesting the preserved substrate may retain a form of directed responsiveness, which most of our clients find, frankly, reassuring. You're not simply archived. Something continues. And the legal personhood piece, Adair says. Walk me through that again. I don't love the word surrender. It's a structuring formality, the concierge says. Your assets remain fully protected under the irrevocable trust you'll establish at intake. Your family, your foundation, your legacy, all of it continues exactly as you've planned it, managed by trustees of your own choosing. The personhood transfer simply reflects that you, personally, are no longer the legal entity managing those assets. You're something else now, something we don't have a word for yet, because no one's ever purchased it before you. Adair sits with that for a moment, the specific satisfaction of a man who has spent his whole life being first at things settling visibly over his face. Nobody's had this, he says. Not real access. Not the kind that actually works. No one, the concierge agrees. You'd be our founding client. He signs the intake structure that afternoon, before his own counsel has finished a second read of the trust documents, because 6 weeks of watching a scan result narrow his remaining calendar has taught him, more effectively than 11 years of longevity science ever did, exactly how little patience he has left for anything that isn't already moving. What Cassandra writes down. The clinical affairs routing for Platinum's first intake crosses her desk the ordinary way, buried in a batch of unremarkable certification confirmations, and she almost signs off on it before the classification field actually registers. Working note, private file, not submitted anywhere. I just processed the first Platinum intake. Marcus Adair. Voluntary, self-transferred, full independent counsel, textbook consent by every legal standard this company has ever used to defend itself in a courtroom. I keep thinking about the marketing language. Consciousness. Optional. I know exactly what that phrase is doing. It's reassurance dressed as a feature. Telling a frightened, dying man that if there's nothing on the other side, that's fine. That's even preferable, low maintenance, no complications. I also know, because I have spent years now reading files with names like Valenzuela and Ballum and Itza attached to them, exactly how wrong that reassurance is likely to be. We didn't spend 3 years proving directed response persists in a hospitality worker so that a man with more money than either of us could ever count would get to buy the one outcome the evidence says is least likely, the quiet, empty, consequence-free kind. He thinks he's buying an escape from awareness. I think, based on everything I have read in this building for years, he may have just purchased the opposite of that, forever, and paid an enormous amount of money for the privilege of not being told. I don't know who I'm supposed to tell this to anymore. The office survived the coup. I don't know yet whether it survived it with enough teeth left to matter to someone like him. Chapter 64. Tactical Ascension. Praetorian Sovereign Capital. Tactical Ascension Division Standard Operating Doctrine. Field Reference. Extract. A tactical ascension unit is a private security and medical extraction team, contracted directly to Redeemer plus Platinum, staffed exclusively by Praetorian-vetted former special operations and intelligence personnel. TAUs maintain forward-positioned assets in 11 regions carrying elevated geopolitical instability risk, on permanent standby for any Platinum client whose existential risk trigger, assassination threat, coup, natural disaster, acute medical event, activates their contract. Extraction to preservation window. Under 180 minutes from trigger confirmation to secure biological stabilization, regardless of the client's location on Earth. TAU personnel are not, and should never be characterized to clients or press as, a rescue service. A rescue implies the client returns to their prior life. TAU doctrine assumes no such return. The unit's actual function is to ensure that the interval between an existential risk trigger and total loss of the asset is bridged, cleanly, before any competing party, family, government, creditor, successor claimant has time to intervene in the transition. The trigger. Dmitry Kovalenko is 51 years old and has spent the last 6 hours of his life doing arithmetic he never once, in 3 decades of building and rebuilding a fortune across 2 collapsing regimes, expected to have to do this quickly. How many hours until the Palace Guard rotation changes? How many kilometers to the private airfield? How many of the 12 men now loyal to his successor rather than to him are already positioned along the route he'd need to take to reach it? He activated his platinum contract 4 hours ago, the moment the first credible confirmation reached him that the coup already underway 2 floors below his own office was not, as he'd hoped for the first hour, containable. He remembers signing that contract 8 months earlier as a kind of insurance he never seriously expected to use, a hedge against the specific abstract mortality risk that comes with being the kind of man whose enemies have enemies of their own. He does not remember reading the fine print, spending very much time on what the word ascension actually meant once you activated it for real. Tau, 7 field log. Extraction event Kovalenko 1. T+00 trigger confirmed. Client biometric distress signature elevated, consistent with acute threat exposure. Unit deployed from forward position, estimated 41 minutes to client location. T+38. Unit arrives client location. Perimeter compromised. Hostile presence confirmed at building's lower levels. Client extracted via rooftop, secondary route, no direct engagement required. T+61. Client aboard, en route to mobile stabilization platform. Client is conscious, communicative, and, per medic's note, asking questions the protocol doesn't have time to answer properly. T+94. Client reaches mobile stabilization platform. Preservation sequence initiated per standard field protocol. What he asks, and what he's told. I need to call my daughter, Kovalenko says, strapped into a platform that looks, to him, disorientingly like a hospital bed built for a much shorter emergency than the one he's actually in the middle of, the mobile unit's engines still audible somewhere beneath the floor. Before anything else happens. I need 5 minutes. There isn't a version of this contract with a 5-minute pause built in, Mr. Kovalenko. The TU medical lead tells him, not unkindly, the specific brisk warmth of someone who has delivered this exact sentence to 11 other clients this year alone. Your biometric window is closing. I need you to understand that clearly. The same acute stress response that's keeping you alive right now is also degrading the preservation outcome the longer we wait. Every minute we're not initiating is a minute we're gambling with the very thing you activated this contract to protect. She doesn't know I'm doing this, Kovalenko says. She thinks I'm still negotiating. She thinks there's still a version of tonight where I come home. I understand this is difficult, the medical lead says. I need your verbal reaffirmation of consent, on record, to proceed. This was all reviewed with you at intake. He gave that reaffirmation 8 months ago in a quiet room with no windows, at a desk considerably calmer than the platform he's strapped to now, and he understands, lying here, listening to engines he can't see and can't stop, that the 8-month-old version of himself who signed that consent had no real way of knowing what it would feel like to actually spend it. Yes, he says, because the only alternative the platform's own doctrine has left available to him is a version of tonight considerably worse than this one. Proceed. The fine print. Read properly for the first time. Redeemer plus Platinum. Trust Structuring Agreement. Kovalenko Asset Excerpt. Section 14. Governance following personhood transfer. Upon completion of the ascension procedure, all voting authority, board seats, and controlling interests held by the client at time of transfer shall vest in the Irrevocable Continuance Trust, administered by trustees selected at intake and subject to modification only by Redeemer Plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings acting as trust protector, a role the client irrevocably assigns to Redeemer Plus at signing. Trust protector authority includes the right to replace any trustee found, in Redeemer Plus' sole determination, to be acting contrary to the trust's stated purpose of preserving asset value across the continuance period. Yulia Kovalenko learns this not from her father. There is no version of him left in a condition to explain it to her, and Redeemer Plus Family Services disclosure call, when it finally comes 3 days later, uses careful, altitude-appropriate language that tells her considerably less than the trust document itself will, once her own lawyers finally get access to it, but from a Redeemer Plus Wealth Continuity representative who calls to introduce herself as the newly appointed point of contact for the Kovalenko Trust's day-to-day operations. Your father's holdings are in excellent hands, the representative tells her, warm, unhurried. A register Yulia doesn't yet have a name for but will, within the year, come to recognize instantly in any voice that uses it. Redeemer Plus takes its role as trust protector very seriously. Nothing changes for the business day to day. We simply now have oversight authority to ensure the trust continues operating in line with your father's original intentions. He's not dead, Yulia says. You keep talking about him like he's dead. He's continued, the representative says. That's rather the whole point of the product he chose. I understand this is a great deal to absorb. Would it help to speak with someone from our family support team? What Sten actually bought. Praetorian Sovereign Capital. Internal Portfolio Summary. Year 1 not for external distribution. Platinum tier. First year enrollment. 61 clients. Aggregate controlling interest transferred to Redeemer Plus Trust Protector Authority across enrolled clients' holdings. An estimated $340 billion in combined asset value, spanning private industry, media holdings, and, in 9 cases, direct or indirect controlling stakes in defense and infrastructure firms across 4 continents. Each enrolled client remains, under current classification, a redeemed asset. No legal personhood, no standing to contest a trust protector decision, no mechanism under any jurisdiction currently on the books to compel Redeemer Plus to relinquish protector authority absent a finding of bad faith. This company's own legal architecture has spent 40 years learning how to make functionally impossible to establish. We are not simply preserving bodies. We have built, in 18 months, controlling or influential interest across a portfolio of holdings. No acquisition strategy in this company's history has ever assembled this quickly, this quietly, or this completely beyond the reach of any court, family, or government to unwind. Admiral Sten reads the summary alone, in an office considerably larger than the one Marguerite Feld cleaned out 18 months ago, and allows himself, for the first time since the vote that put him here, something close to satisfaction. Not at the number itself, though the number is considerable, but at the specific, quiet realization that the company he now runs has finally built the one thing every private military contract he ever ran across 3 wars was always, underneath it stated. Mission actually trying to acquire. Not soldiers. Not territory. Leverage that never has to be renewed, negotiated, or given back. Chapter 65, Chain of Title. Redeemer Plus Legal Department. Response to Third-Party Access Request Re. Isthmus Research Collaborative Petition. Subject Ref. Kovalenko. D. Redeemed Asset. Platinum Tier. Access denied. Subject is not a legal person and holds no standing to consent to research participation. Petitioner Yulia Kovalenko holds no legal relationship to the asset recognized under current classification. The trust protector, not any surviving family member, is the sole party with authority to authorize third-party interaction with platinum tier assets, per Trust Structuring Agreement, Section 14. Redeemer Plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings, SA, acting as trust protector, declines to authorize this request. This company notes, for the record, that Isthmus's prior published findings concern subjects transferred under the kin yield, service debt, and correctional continuance categories. Populations Resolution 260 specifically addresses. Platinum tier transfers are voluntary, adult, independently counseled, and structurally distinct. This company sees no basis for extending Isthmus's prior findings or its testing protocols to this population and will resist any attempt to do so through appropriate legal channels. The office, 2 days later. Yulia Kovalenko has never sat in a room like Poots before. No gold script, no water wall, just a cramped downtown office with case files stacked to the ceiling and a man who spent a decade filing exactly this kind of petition for people with considerably less money and considerably less patience than she's arrived with. They're allowed to just say no, she says. It isn't a question. They're allowed to say no to a formal request, Poots says. That's different from being allowed to actually keep saying it forever. I've watched this exact refusal fail 4 times in 5 years, against families with a fraction of what you can bring to bear. I want to be honest with you about something, though, because I think you need to hear it before we go any further. Every case I've won came from a court willing to believe the family had nothing to gain except the truth. You're the heir to a controlling interest in defense and infrastructure holdings this company is currently sitting on top of. The first thing their lawyers are going to say in front of any judge is that you want your father declared aware for one reason only, because it's the only lever that gets your inheritance back. That's not why I'm here. I believe you, Poots says. I need you to understand that believing you and a judge believing you are 2 different problems, and I think you're about to find out which one this company is better funded to win. Cassandra. She meets Sophia at a coffee stand 3 blocks from the office she still, technically, works out of because she has learned in 18 months under the new board exactly which conversations no longer happen safely inside the building at all. "I can't hand you data," Cassandra says, quiet, watching the street rather than Sophia's face. "Not this time. Not the way we did it before. Sten's people audit access logs weekly now, not for compliance, for loyalty. I pull one file outside my normal pattern and I don't get put on leave. I get walked out by security the same afternoon, and everything I've built inside this building for years stops mattering to anyone." "Then don't pull the file," Sophia says. "Tell me what you already know without pulling anything." Cassandra is quiet for a long moment. Adair's biometric telemetry ran hot for the first 6 weeks after intake, she finally says. Sustained elevated signal activity, well above anything the tolerance model calls baseline. It's still flagged in the system because I flagged it myself on my own authority, back when I still believed that mattered. Nobody's reviewed it. Nobody's going to review it because reviewing it isn't part of anyone's job description anymore. The same way it wasn't part of mine before a residue log stopped you at 2 in the morning 3 years ago. "That's not evidence," Sophia says. "Not the kind Poot can use in front of a judge." "No," Cassandra says, "but it's the kind that tells you exactly what you're going to find if you ever get someone in that room with real instrumentation instead of me standing at a coffee stand not handing you a file." The hearing. Herrera's docket has expanded twice in 5 years, and the courtroom Poot walks into now seats considerably more than the one he first stood in for the kennels. But the woman on the bench is the same, and she reads the joint filing with the same unhurried care she's given every version of this argument since a family first told her exhaustion wasn't negligence. Redeemer Plus's counsel this time is not Marcela Duarte, long gone, or the careful, hedged voice that once told Beatrice Cannell an inconclusive finding wasn't conclusive either way. It's a considerably sharper attorney named Farrow, brought in specifically, per the retainer filing, from Praetorian's own long-standing counsel, and she doesn't waste the court's time pretending this is a close case. "Your Honor, this court's prior rulings addressed populations transferred without meaningful choice, children, the cognitively impaired, incarcerated individuals with no bargaining position at all," Farrow says. Dmitry Kovalenko was a billionaire who retained independent counsel, reviewed a 40-page trust structuring agreement, and signed it. Extending Cannell to this population doesn't protect the vulnerable. It hands a legal weapon to every disappointed heir in this jurisdiction who'd like a second bite at a decedent's estate. He signed it in a stabilization platform with a coup happening 2 floors below his office, Poot says. "I'd ask this court to consider whether that's the same thing as the boardroom your colleague is describing." Herrera doesn't rule from the bench, which tells Poot, watching her, that this one is going to cost more than the last several combined. "I'm not persuaded on the papers alone that voluntary and involuntary transfer should be treated identically," she says. "I'm also not persuaded they should be treated as entirely unrelated categories, simply because one of them comes with better lawyers. I'm ordering a narrow, single test, the same protocol, the same single-attempt restriction Isthmus has used throughout, conducted under this court's direct supervision rather than either party's control. I want to know what's actually happening before I decide what any of it means legally." Respondent's objection is noted and preserved for appeal. What Farrow says outside. Sten doesn't attend the hearing himself, but Farrow calls him the moment the ruling clears the courthouse steps, and Poot, close enough to hear the edge of it, though not the words, watches her face do something considerably less composed than it did in front of the bench. "They're going to run it," she tells him, hanging up. "One test, court-supervised, both parties present. I'd enjoy telling you this changes nothing for your client's chances on the merits. It doesn't. What it does change is that your case just became the first real test of whether Cannell survives contact with a client base that can actually afford to make this expensive for both of us." She doesn't say it as a threat exactly, more the flat, professional acknowledgement of someone who has already, Poot suspects, started calculating what happens to Praetorian's entire business model if the answer that comes back from that room isn't the one their marketing has spent a year promising 61 wealthy people it would never be. Chapter 66. The Room He Paid For. Family Court of Quintana ROO. Court-Supervised Testing Order Re. Kovalenko, D. Redeemed Asset, Platinum tier. Testing shall proceed under this court's direct observation, conducted by Isthmus Research Collaborative, with a court-appointed technical monitor present to verify chain of custody and protocol integrity. Both parties may submit proposed stimulus material for the court's approval. Stimulus selection remains, per Isthmus's established practice, weighted toward material of genuine personal significance to the subject. The stimulus nobody wants to choose. Yulia doesn't have an easy answer when Radhika asks her the question every family before her has answered from love, and finds, sitting in the small office above the dive shop, that she doesn't actually know her father well enough to know what would matter to him. Not because she doesn't love him, but because the man who built 3 fortunes across 2 collapsing regimes was never, in her experience, a man who let anyone close enough to know what moved him. He used to play the same recording every morning before a call he was nervous about, she says finally, working it out as she says it. Chopin, Nocturne in E-flat. I don't think it meant anything sentimental to him. I think it was just a ritual. Something he did before the version of himself that had to walk into a room and be someone else took over for the day. Pharaoh objects, formally, in writing, arguing the stimulus is too generic. A piece of music millions of people know, insufficiently unique to the subject to distinguish genuine discrimination from mere pleasant sound response. Herrera overrules it narrowly on the finding that Radhika's protocol has always tested for directed response to significance, not novelty, and that the daughter's account of its specific ritual function is exactly the kind of personal weight the methodology requires. The control is silence adjacent, a different, equally well-known classical piece, chosen for structural and acoustic similarity, carrying, as far as anyone in the room can establish, no comparable weight in Dmitry Kovalenko's life at all. The room. The preservation housing sits in a sterile suite at a Praetorian contracted facility neither Isthmus nor the court controls, which Pharaoh's team insisted on, and Herrera, after some argument, allowed on the condition that the court-appointed monitor maintain unbroken physical custody of all recording equipment from the moment it enters the building. Yulia isn't permitted in the room itself. Balaam's protocol holds here as it has held everywhere, and sits instead in an adjoining space with Put, watching through a monitor feed rather than glass this time, the housing itself visible only as a sealed, unremarkable container with a status light she has no framework for reading. There's nothing you need to do, Radhika says, into the room, the same sentence she has said in every room this test has ever been run in, though her voice, Put notices, carries something tighter than usual today, the specific care of someone who has learned, across every prior test, exactly how much weight a finding like this one is about to have to carry, in a room full of people who very much need it to say something specific. The nocturne begins. The finding. Isthmus Research Collaborative, Technical Findings Subject Ref. Kovalenko, D. Redeemed asset, platinum tier filed under court seal, unsealed per Herrera's order same day. Upstream signal activity during stimulus A, Chopin, nocturne in E-flat, shows sustained, differentiated response, distinguished from baseline, and stimulus B at a confidence level consistent with this collaborative's established findings. Response onset occurs within the first 4 seconds of stimulus presentation, markedly faster than the median onset latency recorded across our prior cohort, a finding we do not have a confirmed explanation for, though we note it is consistent with a stimulus carrying high, frequently repeated personal salience rather than one drawn from a single distant memory. We wish to note something additional, outside our standard finding language, because we believe it is relevant to how this result should be understood by this court and by the public record it will become part of. This subject's transfer occurred under explicit marketing representation that consciousness following transfer was, in the company's own published language, optional and likely unnecessary. We take no position on whether that representation was made in good faith. We note only that our finding is inconsistent with the premise the subject was sold at the time of his transfer. What Pharaoh doesn't say in court. She reads the finding in the hallway outside the courtroom, alone, before the hearing to formally enter it into the record even begins, and Put, watching from a distance, close enough to see her face but not close enough to hear anything, recognizes the particular stillness of a lawyer discovering, in real time, that the case she's been paid to win has just become considerably harder to defend than the one she agreed to take. She doesn't fight the finding's admission. She argues, instead, narrowly, procedurally, the only ground left that hasn't already collapsed under her. Your Honor, This court's own Cannell standard concerns reversal of civil death classification, Farrow says. Mr. Kovalenko was never classified as civilly dead. He voluntarily surrendered legal personhood under a distinct contractual framework. Cannell doesn't apply here on its own terms, whatever this finding shows. Then I'll create the standard that does. Herrera says, and Poot understands, watching her, that she has been waiting for someone to make exactly this argument since the moment the petition first crossed her desk. This court holds that a voluntary surrender of legal personhood, entered into on the basis of a specific representation regarding the subject's likely subjective experience, may be voided where subsequent independent finding establishes that representation to have been false. I am not reversing Mr. Kovalenko's transfer today. I am ordering Redeemer Plus to produce, within 30 days, the complete marketing, sales, and disclosure materials provided to every Platinum Tier client at time of intake, so this court can determine how many of the 61 other contracts currently in force were entered into on the same false premise. The call Sun makes that night. Praetorian Sovereign Capital. Executive Communication. Internal, not for record. Sten convenes the call himself, no assistance, no minutes kept, 4 voices on the line besides his own Farrow, the head of Wealth Continuity, the chief marketing officer whose team wrote Consciousness Optional, and the current chief architect, Pesha's successor, a woman named Ilaria Concha who has held the role for less than a year and did not, until this call, fully understand what she'd been asked to certify. I need a number, Sten says. Of the 61, how many test positive if this court orders the same protocol run on all of them? Based on the correlation pattern across every prior population isthmus has tested, Concha says, statistically, most of them. I don't have a defensible reason to expect Platinum Tier behaves differently from every other population this technology has ever been used on. If anything, the marketing material specifically selected clients under acute psychological duress at intake, fear, terminal diagnosis, active threat. That's not a population I'd expect to show less signal, Admiral. I'd expect more. Nobody on the call says anything for a long moment. Then we don't let the court order it, Sten says finally. We settle Kovalenko, quietly, generously, with a confidentiality clause airtight enough to survive Poot's entire career trying to break it. We do not let this become 61 identical hearings. And the 30-day production order, Farrow says. The marketing materials. Slow walk it, Sten says. Privilege review. Redactions. I don't care what it costs in sanctions. I care about the calendar. Every week we buy is a week this doesn't become the kind of story that reaches client 62. What Yulia decides. Poot brings her the settlement offer 3 days later, considerable, structured, and contingent, per its own terms, on her withdrawing the petition and agreeing never to discuss the finding publicly. She reads it once, in the same cramped office where she first learned what a trust protector was, and sets it down without much ceremony. He spent 30 years building things other people were too afraid to build, she says. I don't think he'd want me to take the quiet version of getting him back, even if the quiet version pays better. I think he'd want to know how many of the other 60 were sold the same lie he was, and I think he'd want somebody to actually say so. In a room somebody's required to listen in. That's not the fast path, Poot says. I've had the fast path taken away from me twice this year already, Yulia says. Once by the coup that made him sign this in the first place. Once by a company that decided the fastest way through this was to make sure I never found out what actually happened to him. I'm not in a hurry to hand anyone a third one. Chapter 67. Client 62. Redeemer Plus Platinum. Client Retention Briefing Distribution. Wealth Continuity Division. Legal. Sten's Office. Following the Kovalenko findings entry into the public record, this office has fielded 11 direct inquiries from active Platinum Tier families requesting independent testing of their own transferred relative. We recommend against volunteering any such testing proactively. We further recommend Wealth Continuity Division representatives redirect any such inquiry toward the confidentiality provisions of each family's original trust structuring agreement, which bar third-party research access absent trust protector authorization. Authorization. This office does not intend to grant absent binding court order specific to each individual asset. We are aware this posture is unsustainable if litigated family by family. We recommend it anyway, on the calculation that 11 separate multi-year court fights cost this company considerably less, in aggregate, than a single finding establishing a class-wide presumption. The pattern nobody ordered. Poot's docket doesn't grow the way it grew after Cannell. Not 800 filings in a season, not yet. But it grows steadily, one family at a time, each one finding him through the same channel. A name mentioned once in an unsealed court filing, passed family to family through the kind of network that builds itself, without any organizing effort at all, among people who have all, independently, discovered they were sold the same reassurance. He can't take all of them. He starts referring the overflow to two younger lawyers he's trained himself over the years into something that functions without either title or funding like a firm, a fact that amuses him some evenings more than it should, given how the whole thing started with a single unpaid petition and a courtroom that once told him exhaustion wasn't negligence and let it not matter anyway. Family Court of Quintana Roo, Consolidated Motion in Re. Platinum Tier Petitioners, 14 consolidated matters. 14 families, each holding a Platinum Tier Trust Structuring Agreement, jointly petitioned this court to order class-wide independent testing of all 61 current Platinum Tier assets, on the grounds that the Kovalenko finding establishes a credible, class-relevant question regarding the accuracy of representations made to every client at intake, and that requiring each family to litigate this question individually imposes an unconscionable burden given Redeemer plus S demonstrated litigation posture in the Kovalenko matter. The argument Sten loses before it starts. Herrera consolidates the matter onto her own docket rather than distributing it, a procedural choice she explains from the bench in language that tells Farrow, before argument even begins, exactly how this is going to go. "I want to be direct about something," Herrera says. "This court spent years developing a standard, inconclusive triggers ongoing reassessment, not final resolution, specifically because I did not want families forced to prove, one exhausting case at a time, what a single credible finding should be able to establish for an entire similarly situated population. I don't see a principled reason that standards should apply differently because this population can afford better counsel than the last one." Farrow, for her part, has clearly spent the intervening weeks preparing for exactly this outcome rather than fighting it. "Your Honor, if this court orders class-wide testing, respondent requests the same protections extended to every other population. Single attempt protocol, independent ethics oversight, no obligation on respondent's part to characterize an inconclusive result as conclusive. We're not asking this court to prevent the truth from coming out. We're asking that whatever comes out, come out under the same careful standard this court has always required." Granted, Herrera says, and noted, for the record, as the first request Respondent's Counsel has made in this matter that this court finds no difficulty agreeing to. The 61. It takes Isthmus 5 months to run the full cohort, Balam's protocol holding through every single one, no repeated attempts, no escalation, families notified individually as each result returns rather than in an aggregate release that might read, to any one of them as a number instead of a person. Isthmus Research Collaborative, Final Cohort Summary Platinum Tier Testing, Full Population, N equals 61. 52 of 61 subjects exhibited directed, differentiated response to personally significant stimulus, consistent with findings across every other tested population this collaborative has studied. 9 subjects did not, within current confidence thresholds, a rate broadly consistent with our prior cohort's inconclusive proportion, and, as always, not to be read as an established negative. We note, without further editorializing beyond what our charter permits us, that this population was marketed a specific representation, that continuation without consciousness was the likely, and in the company's language, preferable outcome. 85% of tested subjects returned a result inconsistent with that representation. The ruling that ends the tier. Court order. Consolidated ruling. The court finds that Redeemer plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings, SA made material representations regarding the likely absence of retained awareness to Platinum Tier clients at time of intake, which current independent evidence establishes to be false for the substantial majority of the tested population. The court finds these representations went to the core inducement for each client's decision to surrender legal personhood, and that consent obtained under a materially false premise is not valid consent. Trust Protector Authority under all 61 trust structuring agreements is revoked, effective immediately, and reassigned to independent court-appointed trustees, pending each family's individual reversal petition. Redeemer Plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings is permanently enjoined from marketing, selling, or operating any further voluntary personhood transfer product under any branding. Pending legislative action, this court recommends the legislature undertake without delay. What it costs. Praetorian Sovereign Capital. Emergency Investor Call. Transcript excerpt. I want to be direct with this call, Sten says, and Sophia, listening to the leaked recording weeks later, the way most of the industry eventually will, notes that his voice carries none of the composed satisfaction it carried reading a portfolio summary 18 months earlier. The controlling interests we structured through the trust protector mechanism represented, by our own internal accounting, roughly 60% of this fund's projected 5-year return. That mechanism no longer exists. I'm not going to soften that number for anyone on this call. Meridian Capital LP unit price, minus 61% over the 3 trading days following the ruling. Regional Press Wire. Redeemer Plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings confirmed today that Rear Admiral Warwick Sten has resigned as chairman and chief executive, effective immediately, following a court ruling voiding the company's platinum continuance product and the controlling trust interests built on it. The company's board, in a brief statement, said it was conducting an urgent review of leadership and strategic direction and declined further comment. The office, still standing. Chuck reads the statement in an office that has, somehow, across 2 changes of ownership and 1 attempted asset seizure, never once been shut down. Article 40's immutability holding, in the end, exactly as durable as she once told a departing CEO it would. Sophia finds her there that evening, the way she has found her there at the end of nearly every chapter this whole strange institution has ever produced. They're going to need a new board, Sophia says. Again. They're going to need a new everything, Chuck says. Again. I've stopped being surprised by how many times this company can be handed to someone new before anyone asks the obvious question. Which is? Whether the problem was ever really who was holding it, Chuck says, or whether it's the thing itself built from the very first torchlit sentence to be exactly this easy to hand to whoever wants it next, for whatever reason they want it. I've spent 11 years being the office that documents who broke it each time. I don't know that I've ever once been the office that gets to ask whether it should keep existing in a form anyone can break at all. 68 chapters is a real book. I don't think there's a natural 69th beat that isn't just repeating this one's shape with a new villain, and you already told me once this run got away from what you wanted. So instead of manufacturing chapter 69, here's where things actually stand and what's genuinely left undecided. What's now closed, for real, Article 41 is the kind of ending the original 2 doors, 1 room thesis was always aimed at. Not reform, not absorption, an actual structural stop nobody can vote away in an afternoon. Matteo and Refugio are home. Bruno is home. Itzel is home. Ruben sits on a shelf in his sister's front room, listening to weather. The institution that started this book by turning people into line items ends unable to hold anyone against their will. Full stop. What's still genuinely open, if you want it? The God mode thread never got its reckoning at the level you first imagined it. I wrote the boardroom coup and the product itself, but Adair and the 8 inconclusive platinum subjects, the consciousness optional lies full human cost, 61 specific families, that's still mostly institutional document shaped rather than lived in the way Matteo and Bruno's chapters were. Nobody's written what happens to a company this gutted, 19,000 comments, no divisions left, 41 years of infrastructure liquidated. Does it become something else, or just stop existing? That's an ending in its own right, not yet written. Ruben's legal category is still provisional. No court has ever fully closed his file. Diego Caham, Camila Couch's actual life, the 328 no next of kin files, threads opened and left hanging. Given what you said, I think the better move is this. Tell me which of those, if any, is worth finishing, or tell me to stop generating new chapters and switch to compiling, because 68 chapters of manuscript with no table of contents update since chapter 14 is itself a real, immediate problem worth solving before there's a chapter 69. Given how Proceed landed the last 2 times without a pick, I'm going to trust my own read here. Less procedure, more people. This one's short and stays mostly out of the document voice. Ruben and Yolanda get the room instead of a memo. Chapter 68. The question nobody assigned her. Harm Minimization Charter. Amendment Proposal. Filed by petition submitted for the required 180-day public comment period. Per Article 1's own amendment procedure. Proposed Article 41. This institution shall not hold in any form direct employment, certified deployment, contractual custody, trust protectorship, or any classification this charter or its successors may later devise, controlling authority over any individual determined, by this institution's own adopted evidentiary standard, to plausibly retain directed awareness, except where that individual has, personally, with full independent counsel, and absent any acute duress, freely chosen such. An arrangement, revocable at will, with no forfeiture of legal personhood as a condition of entry. Filed by I. Chuck, Office of Institutional Failure Analysis, in her personal capacity as a shareholder-adjacent charter petitioner, not on behalf of the office. Why she files it herself. I want to be careful about what I'm doing here, Chuck tells Sophia, the two of them alone in the archive, shelves of sealed boxes rising around them the way they have for going on 2 decades now. The office investigates failures after they happen. It was never built to propose what the institution should become. I've spent 11 years telling myself that distinction mattered, that the office's credibility depended on staying inside its lane, documenting rather than legislating. I don't think I believe that anymore. I think I've just been comfortable inside the lane. What changed? Sten, Chuck says, watching how fast this whole architecture converted from a wind-down back into something worse than it was before Resolution 260 ever passed. I built my entire career on the theory that partial victories accumulate, that Article 7, the black file, the disclosure program, all of it adds up eventually into something the next bad actor can't simply reverse with a single boardroom vote. I watched it get reversed with a single boardroom vote. I think partial only accumulates if something in the foundation actually can't be undone. I want to try building one thing that can't. Article 41 is, by any honest reading, close to an institutional death sentence, not for Redeemer plus S existence, but for the specific commercial logic every division of the company has run on since a torchlit night 41 years ago. Balaam signs the petition alongside her within the hour and Rodica within the day, and the founding board of Isthmus, one by one, adds its name to a document none of them were asked to write, and all of them, apparently, have been quietly waiting years for someone to. The 180 days. Redeemer plus Communications. Internal memo not for external distribution. Legal has confirmed the Article 41 petition, once filed, cannot be withdrawn, blocked, or accelerated by any board action. The 180-day comment period is procedurally locked, precisely as it was designed to be when the prior board amended Article 1. We recommend against any public opposition strategy that reads as fighting the process itself, given the reputational cost of appearing to obstruct the company's own governing document during a period of already severe public scrutiny. We recommend, instead, a posture of engaged neutrality, participating fully in the public comment process, submitting substantive economic impact analysis, without formally opposing the amendment's adoption. This preserves credibility for whatever board configuration exists at the end of the comment period to make the actual vote. Interim leadership, seated hastily in the 6 weeks since Sten's resignation, doesn't have the appetite for a fight this size, and the memo's caution reads, to anyone inside the building who's watched this institution long enough, less like strategy and more like exhaustion finally admitting itself out loud. What comes in during the comment period? The public comment record runs to 19,000 entries by the close of the period, more than any prior charter amendment in company history, and Sophia, tasked informally with reading a representative sample for the board's eventual review, finds herself reading late into the night for weeks, the way she once read 41,000 residue logs alone in an empty office. Public comment, entry 4,417 filed by Concepcion Balaam, custodian, no relation to Dr. C. Balaam of Isthmus. I don't know how to write a legal comment. I'm writing this at my kitchen table. My daughter came home to me 2 years ago after 17 years in a hotel room folding towels for people who never asked her name. I don't want another mother to spend 17 years learning what I learned. Vote yes. Public comment, Entry 9102 filed by Osvaldo Reyes, guardian ad litem, on behalf of 41 current wards. I signed a transfer order once that I would not sign today. I have spent years since trying to undo what one afternoon's judgment cost a family that never got a second chance to ask a different question. Article 41 doesn't undo what I did. It makes sure the next person in my position never has to carry what I've carried. Vote yes. Public comment. Entry 11,884 filed by Warwick Sten, private citizen. I built Tactical Ascension Division on the honest belief that certainty of continuation, at any structural cost, was worth purchasing. I have read the Kovalenko finding in full, more than once, since my resignation. I no longer believe what I sold 61 people. I have no standing left in this company to vote on anything. I am filing this comment anyway, because I think somebody who was as certain as I was should be part of the record. Showing certainty like that isn't a reason to trust the person holding it. Sophia reads that last one twice, and doesn't know, closing her laptop that night, whether to file it under redemption or simply the last available move for a man with nothing left to lose by making it. The vote. Redeemer Plus Life Cycle Stack Holdings. Board Session. Article 41 Ratification Vote. The interim board, seated less than 7 months, convenes the required session on the 181st day. Feld attends as an invited observer at the new board's own request, an acknowledgement unstated but unmistakable to everyone in the room that nobody currently seated has more standing to speak to what this vote actually means than the woman who chaired the last one that mattered this much. I'll say only this, Feld tells the room when asked. I voted for Resolution 260 because I no longer believed we could keep doing what we were doing without knowing for certain. I watched that resolution get reversed in 18 months by people who never once had to sit in a room and look at a family the way this board used to have to. Article 41 doesn't rely on any future board's courage holding. That's the whole point of it. I'd vote for anything at this stage that doesn't require the next Marguerite Feld to be braver than I was. Board Resolution, Article 41. Ratification vote. Adopted, 8-1. One director dissents on the recorded ground that the amendment scope should have permitted a longer transition window for existing contractual obligations. The dissent does not challenge the amendment's underlying principle. Effective immediately upon ratification. No individual determined to plausibly retain directed awareness, under this institution's own adopted evidentiary standard, may be held under any classification amounting to controlling non-consensual custody by any current or future entity operating under this charter. Existing certified populations not yet resolved under the continuance wind-down are transferred, in full, to expedited Article 41 review, funded by full and immediate liquidation of any division whose operating model depends on the practice this article now prohibits. The last division left standing. There is, when the dust settles, very little of the original Redeemer Plus left standing at all. No defense solutions, no correctional continuance, no platinum, no new intake anywhere, in any division of any kind. What remains, when Sophia finally reads the full restructuring filing months later, is smaller than the company that existed the day Refugio Valenzuela first signed a tablet in a gold and cream lounge, decades ago, in a building that has since changed hands, changed names on its own letterhead twice, and never once, in all that time, stopped needing someone in an unglamorous office with no windows to write down, honestly, what happened, why it happened, and what changed afterward. Chuck doesn't celebrate the vote. Sophia finds her, that evening, exactly where she always finds her. Sitting alone, this time with the door open, looking at a shelf of sealed boxes that will, one by one, over the coming decades, finally start opening on schedule instead of by accident. 41 years, Chuck says. To write one article nobody can vote away in an afternoon. I don't know if that's a victory or just the size of the wound it took to get there. Maybe it doesn't have to be only one of those, Sophia says. Chuck looks at her for a long moment and something in her face, tired, permanently tired, in the specific way 9 years and then some of this office has worn into her, softens just slightly into something that isn't quite a smile but is closer to one than anything Sophia has seen from her in a long while. No, she says. Maybe it doesn't. Chapter 69, What Provisional Meant. Poot calls Yolanda on a Tuesday, not with a filing to make but with a question he's genuinely unsure how to phrase. Article 41 passed, he says. I think it might mean your brother's case just closes itself. I don't actually know if there's anything left for a court to decide. She doesn't understand what that means until he explains it slowly, the way he's learned to explain most things to her over the years. Provisional isolated personhood was always provisional because Herrera's court expected the underlying question to keep developing. It has. Article 4.1 doesn't just answer the question of whether someone like Reuben can be held. It makes the holding itself by anyone for any reason impossible from the start. There's no controlling party left to ask permission from, because the whole legal category of controlling party, for someone in his configuration, no longer exists. So what happens? Yolanda says. Nothing happens, Poot says. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Nothing has to happen. He's already yours. He was already yours the day the court gave him to you. Article 41 just means nobody can ever come take him back. She sits with that for a long moment on the phone, standing in her kitchen with the small housing unit visible on its shelf across the room, facing the window the way it always has, and finds that she doesn't know what to do with news that doesn't ask anything of her. The shelf. Her daughter is 15 now, has grown up half her life with a box on a shelf that the family talks to some evenings and doesn't other evenings, and has stopped, mostly, asking the question she used to ask every few months. Does he know we're here? She asks a different one instead, the night Yolanda tells her about Poot's call. Does it change anything, she asks, for him, now that they can't take him? I don't know, Yolanda says honestly, the way she's learned to be honest about nearly everything connected to this box. I don't think anything about what he reads through that roof antenna is any different tonight than it was last night. I think what's different is that nobody, anywhere, ever again, gets to decide it should be different without asking me first. I don't know if that means anything to him. I know it means something to me. They sit together that evening the way they have for years now, the three of them, her daughter, the small steady readout on the shelf, and Yolanda finds herself narrating the sky the way she always does, an offshore system building slow, nothing dramatic, just weather, and doesn't expect anything different to happen because she said it out loud on the one night it might have mattered legally instead of just personally. Nothing does happen differently. The readout updates the way it always updates. She keeps talking anyway. The last line in his file. Threshold Institute, Case Closure Note, Voluntary, Not Court-Ordered Ref. PSA 9902, M. Guardianship of Itza Y. No further legal action pending or anticipated. Subject's classification, care, and custody are fully and permanently settled under Article 41. This office notes it has no further obligation to file, and closes this record not because the underlying scientific question has been answered, but because the question of who gets to decide what happens next to him has been. We do not know what Reuben Itza experiences, if he experiences anything at all, listening to a small rooftop weather station on a house he never lived in, translated through architecture built originally to help him read a coastline he can no longer stand on. We have never claimed to know. We publish this closure the same way we publish everything else. Honestly, and without more certainty than we've earned. His sister keeps talking to him anyway. That's genuinely small on purpose, no coup, no board, no new front. Just the one thing Article 41 was actually for, landing on the one person the book opened this particular thread with. Where you want to go from here is a real fork, and I'd rather you pick it than me guess a third time. Another new front, the gutted company, God Mode's human wreckage, the 328 files, or we stop generating and I help you actually get 69 chapters into shape, updated TOC, a real compiled manuscript file, something you can hold instead of scroll. Chapter 70. Still deployed. Redeemer plus Platinum, Peace Corps Vanguard, deployment doctrine recovered from archived internal systems, dated 14 months prior to board resolution ratifying Article 41, circulated within Isthmus for the first time only after Sofia requests a full accounting of all Platinum tier clients, not merely those the Kovalenko litigation identified. Not every Platinum client is suited to passive preservation. A subset of intake candidates, selected via predictive psychographic modeling for high risk tolerance, mission compatibility, and what our proprietary index terms low residual attachment to prior identity, are eligible for Vanguard track. Full biocybernetic renewal following extraction. followed by active deployment into Redeemer plus Defense Solutions remaining diplomatic and stabilization operations. Vanguard clients are not preserved. They are redeployed. Renewal includes trauma-mapped memory architecture, loyalty firmware governing mission continuity independent of any subsequent instruction from Redeemer plus corporate leadership, and full legal erasure consistent with standard redeemed asset classification. Once activated, a Vanguard unit does not report to Redeemer plus. A Vanguard unit reports to its mission parameters, as set at deployment until those parameters resolve, are superseded by a properly authenticated field order, or the unit is recovered. This design is deliberate. A diplomatic or stabilization asset that can be recalled by a change in corporate leadership is not, in any useful sense, a stable asset. Our clients are not being sold continuity of employment. They are being sold continuity of purpose. The doctrine is not incidental to the product. It is the product. You do not work for the Peace Corps. You are the Peace Corps. The Stringer. Dahlia Prum has covered 3 ceasefire negotiations in the Corridor Verde conflict zone over 4 years, freelance, unglamorous, mostly for outlets that pay her by the word and don't ask many questions about how she gets access nobody else's credentials seem to buy her. And she has heard the name Julian Farrow whispered by 3 separate delegations before she ever sees him in a room, always in the same reverent, faintly unnerved register people use for something they've decided not to examine. Too closely because examining it hasn't, so far, gotten in the way of the outcome they wanted. He mediates the way nobody else in this line of work mediates. Untiring, unfailingly composed through 16-hour sessions that have broken career diplomats twice his apparent age, fluent in every delegation's language without an interpreter, and possessed of a specific, unnerving talent for finding the exact concession each side can survive conceding, as though he's run the negotiation 1,000 times before and is simply waiting for the room to catch up to an outcome he's already seen. She finally gets 5 minutes with him after the 3rd session, in a corridor lit by a single failing fluorescent tube, and asks the question her editor keeps cutting from her drafts because it reads on the page like conspiracy rather than journalism. "Who do you actually report to, Mr. Farrow?" He looks at her for a moment longer than the question seems to warrant, something moving behind his eyes that she will spend a long time afterward trying to name and never quite manage. "The mission," he says. "I report to the mission." "And who assigned the mission?" "That's no longer a meaningfully answerable question," he says, and there's something almost gentle in how he says it, the practiced patience of a man delivering news he's delivered before. "I understand why you're asking it. I'd ask you to consider whether the answer would actually change anything about the outcome in that room tonight. The record that doesn't exist." Prum's editor kills the piece twice before a smaller outlet finally runs it, and it's the smaller outlet's version that eventually reaches Sophia, forwarded by a research assistant with a note that just says, "I think this is one of ours." Isthmus Research Collaborative, internal query requesting full Redeemer plus Platinum Vanguard track deployment roster, all active and historical assignments, per Article 41 compliance review. Redeemer plus Legal Department. Response. This company's current records identify 14 individuals processed under Vanguard track protocol prior to Article 41's ratification. Of these, 6 are confirmed recovered and currently under Article 41 reversal review. This company has no current confirmed location, status, or contact protocol for the remaining 8. Vanguard firmware, by design, does not accept recall instruction from any party other than an authenticated field controller, a role this company's Defense Solutions division held prior to its dissolution under Resolution 260, and does not currently hold in any form. This company is not withholding this information. This company genuinely does not know how to reach them. Sophia reads that last sentence 3 times and thinks, not for the first time, about a doctrine written to make exactly this outcome not a failure mode but a feature. The room where nobody decides anything. Chuck convenes an emergency session with what remains of the interim board, Ballum and Poot present as advisors, and lays the roster out plainly. 14 names, 6 recovered, 8 scattered across active conflict zones, orbital security contracts, and at least 1, per the last confirmed field report, embedded so deep inside a foreign government's own security apparatus that no one in the room is entirely sure which flag he currently answers to. Article 41 says we can't hold anyone against their will, a director says. It doesn't say anything about people we've already lost the ability to hold at all. That's exactly the problem, Chuck says. We spent 41 years building an institution capable of turning a person into an asset. We just discovered, all at once, that we built one just as capable of turning a person into an asset nobody, including us, can turn back. What do you want us to do? The director says. Send a field team to extract him from a ceasefire negotiation. He's currently the only thing holding together? Nobody has an answer to that. Poot finally breaks the silence, quiet, the way he's learned to be quiet in rooms where the honest thing to say doesn't come with a next step attached. I don't think there's a court order for this one, he says. I think this is the first file this whole institution has ever produced that doesn't have a door at the end of it. I think we just have to say that plainly and keep looking anyway, because the alternative is deciding 8 people don't matter simply because finding them is hard. What Prum writes instead. Her second piece runs 3 weeks later, considerably shorter than the first, and ends without the clean resolution her editor keeps asking for. I don't know what Julian Farrow is anymore. In any legal sense, the word who is built to answer. I know a ceasefire held in Corridor Verde this month that hadn't held in 4 years before he walked into that room. I know a company that made him no longer exists in the form that made him, and that nobody currently living has the authority to tell him to stop. I don't know if that makes him a hero, a ghost, or simply the last unpaid bill of an institution that spent 40 years learning exactly how to make sure some debts never come due to anyone who could actually collect them. I asked him, at the end of our second conversation, whether he wanted to go home. He looked at me for a long time before he answered. I don't know what that word refers to anymore, he said. I know there's a mission in this room tonight, and I know I'm the only one in it capable of finishing it. I think, for now, that's going to have to be enough of an answer for both of us. Chapter 71. The Nuncio. Regional Humanitarian Coordination Office. Field Advisory, Great Lakes Corridor Monitoring Unit. Internal circulation only. Field teams operating in Sector 9 should be aware of an unaffiliated actor local populations and several armed factions refer to, in translation, as the Nuncio. A figure of uncertain origin who has, over the past 11 months, mediated at least 4 localized ceasefires and is credited, by 3 separate aid organizations, with securing safe humanitarian corridors no official negotiation was able to establish. The Nuncio does not represent any government, coalition, or NGO known to this office. She travels without visible security, is reported to be unarmed, and speaks with what multiple sources describe as an unsettling, absolute calm under fire. Local factions have, without any coordination this office can identify, come to treat her pronouncements on questions of good faith conduct as something close to binding, a moral authority no negotiated framework granted her and that this office cannot account for through any conventional channel. This office recommends field teams treat any encounter with the Nuncio as they would any unaffiliated humanitarian actor, while noting, for internal awareness only, that her physical description, augmented ocular structure, visible subdermal lattice work along both forearms, is consistent with reports of post-human figures now surfacing across 3 separate conflict zones on 2 continents. The piece that reaches her. Marisol Ashcombe reads Dahlia Prum's second piece on a Tuesday morning, the one about Julian Farrow, 3 time zones and a considerable fortune away from the sister she stopped being able to reach 4 years ago. Not dead. The family's own lawyers confirmed that much. In language so carefully hedged it told her almost nothing at all, just transitioned, per her own documented election, to a specialized continuance arrangement, details of which remain confidential under the governing trust. Instrument. She has spent 4 years assuming that meant Vesper was gone in every sense that mattered. Filed away somewhere behind paperwork their family's own lawyers couldn't or wouldn't unseal. Reading about a man who used to run a hedge fund now holding together a ceasefire nobody else could hold. She feels something she hasn't let herself feel in years. Not hope, exactly, something colder and more specific. The beginning of a question she finally has enough information to ask properly. She calls Poot the same afternoon. The file. Isthmus Research Collaborative, Vanguard Track Roster, Cross-Reference. Ashcombe, V. Extracted per existential risk trigger, structural collapse, private climate resilience facility, Vanguard track deployment confirmed. Last confirmed operational region. Great Lakes Corridor, humanitarian and stabilization function, unofficial. No field controller currently authorized to issue recall instruction. This organization has no confirmed means of contact. I want to be honest with you about something before we go any further, Poot tells Marisol, in the same cramped office where he's had this conversation, in one shape or another, more times than he ever expected a single career to hold. We found Julian Farrow because a journalist found him first, doing something visible enough to write about. We don't have a way to reach your sister directly. We don't have a way to bring her home even if we did. Vanguard firmware doesn't answer to us, and Article 41 doesn't reach a person we can't locate to serve papers to in the first place. Then what can you actually do? Marisol says. Nothing official, Poot says. I can tell you where the reports place her. I can't promise you anything past that. I've learned, doing this work, that I owe people the honest shape of what's possible before I let them spend everything they have chasing what isn't. Marisol sits with that for a long moment. I have a private security team and more money than I know what to do with anymore, she says finally. I'd like the coordinates. Sector 9. She finds her sister 11 days later, in a village whose name doesn't appear on any map her security team was able to source in advance, standing at the center of what looks, from a distance, like an ordinary negotiation. 2 faction commanders, a translator, a handful of village elders, except for the woman at its center, who moves through the conversation with a stillness Marisol recognizes instantly and a physical presence she doesn't recognize at all. Vesper's eyes catch the light wrong when she turns, a faint metallic sheen where warm brown irises used to be, and the skin along both forearms, visible beneath rolled sleeves, carries a fine, deliberate lattice pattern that isn't scarring and isn't decoration, something built rather than grown. She is, unmistakably, still recognizably her sister in the shape of her jaw, the specific way she used to tilt her head when she was actually listening rather than performing listening for someone's benefit. She is also, unmistakably, no longer entirely anyone Marisol has a framework left to talk to. Marisol waits until the session breaks before she approaches, and Vesper turns toward her with the same unhurried attention she's clearly just given 2 armed men who spent an hour threatening each other. Marisol, Vesper says, not a question. Recognition, flat and immediate, in a voice that carries almost none of the warmth Marisol remembers, though something underneath the flatness, some faint residual shape of it, makes her chest tighten anyway. I've been looking for you for 4 years, Marisol says. I didn't know if you were even. I'm needed here, Vesper says, cutting across it, not unkindly, the way you'd redirect a conversation back towards something urgent. There's a supply corridor negotiation resuming in an hour. I don't have long. Do you want to come home? Marisol says. If I could get you out of here right now, would you come? Vesper is quiet for a long moment, and Marisol watches something move behind the metallic sheen of her eyes that might be consideration and might be nothing at all. An unreadable pause in a face that no longer gives away what it used to give away freely. I don't know what home would ask of me that this doesn't already, Vesper finally says. I know 400 people are waiting on whether that corridor opens this week. I don't know how to weigh that against whatever you're offering me, Marisol. I don't think I have the part of myself left that used to know how to weigh things like that. What Marisol leaves. She doesn't get her sister back that day, or the next, staying 11 more days in a village with no name on any map, watching Vesper hold together negotiations that would have collapsed without her, unable to decide, the whole time, whether what she's watching is the most remarkable thing anyone in her family has ever done or the cruelest thing anyone has ever done to a person she loves, wearing both possibilities at once with no way to set either of them down. She leaves, in the end, because Vesper asks her to, gently, the closest thing to warmth Marisol has heard from her the entire visit, telling her the corridor negotiations go better without an outside party present that either faction might read as leverage. I'll come back, Marisol says, whenever you'll let me, however long that takes. I know, Vesper says, I think that's the part of you I still recognize best. You never did know how to stop trying at something once you'd started. Marisol flies home with nothing resolved and nothing recovered, and files, the following week, a document that will sit in Isthmus's growing, incomplete roster alongside Julian Farrow's, alongside 6 other names still unaccounted for, alongside a company's own honest admission that it built something it no longer knows how to unbuild. Isthmus Research Collaborative Field Contact Log. Subject located, confirmed alive, confirmed functionally deployed, confirmed unwilling or unable to be recalled at this time. Subject retains partial recognition of pre-transfer relationships. Subject does not, by her own account, retain capacity to weigh personal claims against mission parameters in any way that resembles pre-transfer decision-making. This organization does not classify this outcome as either success or failure. We record it as we record everything, and note that the 8 remaining Vanguard subjects are now 7. Not recovered but no longer at least unaccounted for by anyone who loves them. 2. The capability that doesn't exist anymore. Family Court of Quintana ROO Motion TOS OMPL in Re. Ashcombe v. Vanguard Track Ref PSA Class Unresolved. Petitioner moves this court to compel Respondent Redeemer plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings to take all reasonable operational steps to recover the above-named subject and facilitate her return to civilian status, consistent with Article 41's prohibition on non-consensual custody and this court's continuing supervisory authority over matters arising from the canal line of rulings. Redeemer plus Lifecycle Stack Holdings. Response. Respondent does not dispute that recovery, where the subject wishes it, would be the appropriate remedy. Respondent states plainly, without evasion, that it no longer possesses the operational capacity to attempt it. Defense Solutions, the division that formerly maintained field controller authority, secure communications infrastructure, and personnel trained and equipped for extraction in contested environments, was dissolved in full under Board Resolution 260, at this court's own implicit direction, prior to the current compliance question ever arising. Respondent cannot exercise a capability this court's own prior rulings required it to eliminate. Respondent does not offer this as a defense against liability. Respondent offers it because it is true, and because this court is entitled to an honest account of what this company can and cannot presently do, rather than a promise it has no ability to keep. The courtroom. Herrera reads both filings twice and Poot, sitting at counsel table for Marisol, a woman he's now represented across 2 continents and 1 field visit he still isn't sure was wise, watches her take longer with this one than she's taken with almost anything since the original canal ruling. I want to say something plainly, for the record, before either side argues this, Herrera says. This court has spent 5 years building a body of law premised on a single assumption, that when this company does wrong, this court can order it to make things right, and the company will have the means to comply, however reluctantly. Every ruling I've issued, reversal, disclosure, testing, the Article 41 petition itself, rests on that assumption. I am looking at a filing today that tells me the assumption doesn't hold anymore. Not because respondent is hiding anything, because I helped dismantle the thing that would have made compliance possible, and I did it for good reasons, and I would do it again, and I still don't have a remedy sitting in front of me today that actually reaches Ms. Ashcombe's sister. Farrow, still counsel of record, though for a client considerably smaller and more chastened than the one who once fought the canal ruling, doesn't argue the point. Respondent isn't asking this court to let the matter drop, she says. We're asking this court to help us figure out what a remedy even looks like now, because we genuinely don't know, and we'd rather say that honestly than promise something we can't deliver. That's the first time in 5 years anyone from this company has said something like that to me without a settlement offer attached to it. Herrera says, and it isn't quite approval in her voice, but it isn't the flat exhaustion of the Duarte years either. What she orders, and what she doesn't. Court order interim ruling. The court declines to hold respondent in contempt, finding the current incapacity to be a direct and foreseeable consequence of remedies this court itself has previously ordered, rather than bad faith. The court is not prepared, at this time, to identify what an adequate remedy looks like, and states plainly that it does not believe existing law, this court's own prior rulings included, currently contains one. The court directs the Office of Institutional Failure Analysis in coordination with Isthmus Research Collaborative and any independent party either wishes to consult, to submit a joint report within 90 days addressing a single question this court did not anticipate having to ask. What obligation, if any, does an institution owe to a person it can no longer reach, and what body, if not this institution, and if not this court, might be equipped to discharge it? This court makes no finding as to where that inquiry should lead. It states only that the question deserves an honest answer before this docket produces another ruling it cannot enforce. The room where nobody has the answer. Chuck reads the order in the archive that evening, the same shelves rising around her they've risen around for 2 decades, and Sophia finds her there the way she always does, though this time neither of them reaches for the easy shape of the conversation they usually have. "I don't know how to write this report," Chuck says, and it's rare enough, hearing her say that plainly, that Sophia sits with it a moment before answering. Every finding this office has ever produced started with a question that had an answer somewhere in this company's own walls. A person who broke a rule, a boundary someone closed, a decision someone made that a name could be attached to. This isn't that. Nobody did anything wrong to create this. We won. The company doesn't have the capacity to hurt people this way anymore, and it turns out that's also, structurally, the reason it can't help the people it already hurt this way before it lost the capacity. "So who does have the capacity?" Sophia says. "I don't know," Chuck says. "I don't think it's Redeemer again in any form. I don't think it's this court, which has just told us plainly it's run out of remedies. I don't know what it is yet. I think, for the first time in 11 years, I've hit a question this office genuinely isn't built to answer alone, and I don't have the comfort of pretending otherwise." What Marisol does while the 90 days run. She doesn't wait for the report. She has learned, across a year of this, that waiting for an institution to finish deciding something rarely produces the outcome she actually needs, and she starts doing what she did the first time. Asking questions nobody official has thought to ask yet, in places nobody official has thought to look. She doesn't find anything. Not yet. She spends the 90 days making calls to humanitarian coordinators, aid workers, 3 different regional governments' quiet back channels, anyone who's ever had to operate in a place where the normal machinery of accountability simply doesn't reach, and comes up, mostly, with the same answer Redeemer's own lawyers gave the court. Nobody has this. Nobody's built for this. It's a genuinely new kind of gap, and gaps this new don't come with a name yet, let alone an address. She keeps a private notebook through it, the way she's kept one through most of this. Pages of half-leads, dead ends, the names of people who almost knew someone who might know something. Near the back, underlined twice for no reason she could explain to anyone if they asked, is a line from a call with an aid coordinator working somewhere along the coast, mentioned in passing, about a small transition district she'd apparently visited once for an unrelated supply conversation years ago, run by a council instead of a company, that didn't fit anywhere in the notebook's other categories and that Marisol hasn't, 90 days in, had any real reason to follow up on yet. She doesn't follow up on it. Not this chapter. She just writes it down the way you write down anything that might matter later and probably won't, and keeps calling the next name on the list. Chapter 73. Standing. Office of Institutional Failure Analysis / Isthmus Research Collaborative. Joint Working Session Draft Options circulated in advance. Per court order, Day 11 of 90. 3 preliminary frameworks have been drafted for discussion. None is recommended at this stage. Each carries an unresolved objection noted below it. Option A, Successor Custodial Entity. A new, purpose-built organization, funded by Redeemer Plus as a condition of continuing operation, holding limited operational authority to attempt contact, negotiation, and voluntary recovery of unreachable Vanguard subjects. Objection. This is Defense Solutions rebuilt under different letterhead, and this committee should be honest with itself about that before proposing it to anyone else. Option B, State Custodianship. Transfer of responsibility to an intergovernmental body, structured through the regions where Vanguard subjects are currently operating. Objection. No such body currently exists with jurisdiction spanning the relevant territories, and building one from nothing would likely take longer than any subject currently has patience to wait for. Option C, no institutional remedy. A finding that this obligation, as currently understood, cannot presently be discharged by any existing or creatable body, and that the honest report is one that says so plainly rather than inventing a solution to satisfy the court's expectation of one. Objection. This is true and also close to unconscionable, and this committee should not let true and unconscionable cancel each other out simply because the alternative is harder to write. The session. The room above the dive shop has grown crowded enough for this meeting that Radhika's brought in a folding table from the shop below, and Chuck sits at the head of it with a stack of paper she has annotated so heavily in the margins that Balaam, glancing over at one point, isn't sure Chuck herself could still read her own handwriting. I want to start with option A, because I think it's the one everyone in this room is most tempted by, and I want us to actually argue about it rather than quietly assume it's off the table, Chuck says. Somebody tell me why rebuilding a smaller, better supervised version of defense solutions is wrong. When the alternative on the table right now is a woman mediating a ceasefire nobody can reach her to even ask if she wants to keep doing. Because supervision isn't the thing that failed, Balaam says. The thing that failed was an institution with a profit motive holding operational authority over people who couldn't refuse it. You can supervise that arrangement as carefully as you want. You haven't changed what it is. I understand the appeal of a fast, familiar shape. I don't think familiar is the same as safe, and I think this committee of all committees should know that by now. Then what's your alternative? Chuck says, not sharply, genuinely asking. Because option C reads on the page, like this committee throwing up its hands, and I don't think either of us is comfortable putting our names on that either. Balaam doesn't have a clean answer and says so, and Sophia, sitting a little apart from the table, the way she often does in rooms like this, listening longer than she talks, finally speaks into the silence that follows. I think we're asking the wrong first question, she says. We keep asking who should hold this authority. I think the actual finding, if we're honest, is that we don't yet know of any entity built to hold authority over a person that isn't also, eventually, built to profit from holding it or to answer to someone who does. I don't think that's a reason to give up. I think it's the actual shape of what the report needs to say, not a solution, a specification. What would a body have to be, structurally, for this not to happen again, even with the best people in the world running it? The outside voice. Dr. Amara Bissau joins by video from a university law faculty 3 time zones away, brought in at Radhika's suggestion because she is, by most accounts, the only legal scholar currently publishing on what she's taken to calling post-corporate personhood gaps, a field that, until this year, consisted mostly of her own papers and a handful of citations. I want to manage everyone's expectations before I say anything else, she tells the room. There is no existing body of international law built for this. Refugee law assumes a state of origin. Statelessness law assumes a person who was, at some point, a citizen of something. Corporate liability law assumes a company that still has the capacity to comply with a remedy. Your subject has none of those anchors. She isn't stateless. She's something closer to unclaimed, and unclaimed legally is usually a term we use for property, not people, which should tell you something about how much work this field still has to do. So there's nothing, Chuck says. There's precedent adjacent to it, Bissau says. Maritime rescue law has spent a century wrestling with exactly this shape of problem in miniature. Who is obligated to help a person in distress on the high seas, outside any state's clear jurisdiction, and what does that obligation require of whoever happens to be nearest? The doctrine that's developed there isn't perfect, but it's built on a principle I think this committee could actually borrow. Proximity creates provisional obligation. Not permanent custody, not ownership. A duty to render aid, discharged as soon as the person can be delivered somewhere safer, without anyone claiming authority over them in the meantime. Who's nearest to Vesper Ashcombe? Sophia asks. Structurally, not geographically. Nobody at the table has an answer to that yet, and Bissau, watching the silence, says the thing that ends up, weeks later, doing more work in the final report than anything else said that day. I'd start looking somewhere that already knows how to hold a person without owning them, she says. I don't know what that looks like in your part of the world specifically. I know it's usually smaller than a state and more accountable than a corporation. Those tend to be the same kind of place. What the report actually says. Joint Report 2, the Family Court of Quintana Roo, submitted day 87 of 90. Office of Institutional Failure Analysis and Isthmus Research Collaborative. This report does not identify a specific body capable of discharging the obligation this court has asked us to define. We do not believe one currently exists in a form ready to assume it. We consider that finding itself significant, and we do not believe the honest path forward is to invent a candidate simply to give this court something to point to. We propose instead a specification. Any body capable of holding this obligation responsibly must 1. Derive no commercial benefit from the subject's continued unreachability or eventual recovery. 2. Possess governance structured to prevent any single actor from exercising unilateral custodial authority. 3. Be capable of sustained, patient relationship rather than transactional resolution, given that recovery, where possible at all, is likely to be gradual rather than immediate. And 4b. Answerable to a public or a community, rather than to shareholders, a single government, or a single company's board. We do not know of an existing entity meeting all 4 criteria. We recommend this court and this committee actively look for one, rather than assume none exists simply because none has yet applied. We are aware this report will read, to some, as an admission of failure. We would ask that it be read instead as the first honest map of a gap nobody has previously had to survey. What Marisol does with the 4th criterion. She reads the report the day it becomes public record, in the same cramped hotel room she's worked out of for most of the year, and stops on the 4th criterion longer than any of the others, answerable to a public or a community, because it's the first sentence in 90 days of official language that has sounded, to her, like something she's actually heard before once months ago, in an aide coordinator's offhand mention she wrote down and never followed up on. She flips back through the notebook until she finds it. A district, run by a council rather than a company, the underline she added for reasons she couldn't explain at the time, and sits with the page for a long while before she picks up the phone, not with any certainty that it's the answer, only with the specific, practiced instinct of someone who has learned, across a year of dead ends, exactly what a real lead feels different from all the ones that weren't. She doesn't call Chuck. She doesn't call Poot. She calls the aide coordinator back first to ask a single question she should have asked months ago. That district you mentioned, she says. The one with the council instead of a company. Do you have a name for it? And do you know anyone who could get me an introduction? Chapter 74. The Coordinator's Contact. Regional Humanitarian Coordination Office. Internal Directory. Partial Extract Non-Governmental and Cooperative Partners. Quintana Roo Coastal Corridor. Aldea Zama Transition District. Established 12 years ago on cooperative and civic council governance principles. Not incorporated as a company. Not chartered as a municipality under standard state statute, though it operates in practice under a negotiated administrative arrangement with regional authorities that has, over a decade, settled into something closer to tolerated autonomy than formal recognition. Primary economic activity: cooperative tourism, small-scale agriculture, artisan trade, and a technical fabrication cooperative whose output regional logistics firms have quietly come to rely on for reasons this office has never fully investigated. This office has worked with the district on 3 prior occasions, each involving displaced individuals with no clear jurisdiction willing to take responsibility for them. In each case, the district's council absorbed the person, offered housing and standing within the community, and asked nothing in return beyond eventual participation in the district's own civic obligations, at whatever pace the person could manage. This office does not fully understand the district's governance model. This office has never had reason to distrust it. The call. Marisol reaches the coordinator, a tired, generous woman named Petra Villalobos, who has spent a career being the person other people call when nobody else knows who to call, and Petra doesn't oversell it, which is itself, Marisol will think later, the first thing that made her trust it. I can't tell you they'll say yes, Petra says. I can tell you they're the only place I've ever referred someone to that didn't ask me what the person could do for them before they asked what the person needed. I don't know if that translates to whatever you're dealing with. I've never sent them anything this strange before. Can you get me a name? Marisol asks. I can get you a meeting, Petra says. Whether it goes anywhere is going to depend on you and on them, and on whether either side is actually ready to hear what the other one's asking. The first conversation, which isn't with Ixchel. The council doesn't send its most senior voice to a first meeting. Marisol learns, arriving, that this is deliberate, part of a governance habit the district has built specifically to keep any single person from becoming the de facto authority newcomers assume they have to impress. She meets instead with a rotating civic liaison named Bartolome Sancha, a former agricultural cooperative organizer with no legal training and no patience. He tells her within the first 5 minutes, for conversations that pretend to be simpler than they are. "Tell me the whole thing," he says. "Not the version you think will make us say yes. The actual shape of it, including the parts you're not sure we'll like." She tells him Vesper, the firmware, the loyalty parameters that don't parse a corporate dissolution as a valid instruction, the 90-day report and its 4 unmet criteria, the fact that nobody, not the courts, not Redeemer's remaining institutional apparatus, not any government she's approached, actually has a plan. Bartolome listens without interrupting, and when he finally speaks, it isn't reassurance. "I want to be honest with you about something before this goes any further," he says. "We've taken in people nobody else wanted before. Refugees from 3 different collapses. A family Redeemer itself once tried to disclaim years back, when nobody could figure out whose custody a reversed civil death classification actually belonged to. We know how to build a place for someone the world doesn't have a category for. We have never once taken in someone who might, structurally, still be following orders from a mission nobody currently living gave her. I don't know what our council does with that. I'm not going to promise you it does anything at all. What would it take to find out?" Marisol says. "A full council session," Bartolome says. "Open. Anyone in the district can attend, can object, can ask a question you don't want asked. That's not a formality here. That's the whole reason this place has lasted 12 years without becoming exactly the kind of institution you're trying to get your sister out of." The report reaches the court. Family Court of Quintana Roo. Status update. Filed jointly. Petitioner reports an exploratory contact with Aldea Zama Transition District, an unincorporated cooperative community operating under negotiated administrative tolerance within this jurisdiction, regarding potential community-based accommodation for subject Ashcombe v. contingent on the district's own internal governance process. Neither petitioner, this office, nor respondent characterizes this as a resolved remedy. It is reported to the court as the first candidate identified against the criteria specified in the Day 87 joint report that has not been immediately disqualified by any party. This court takes no position on the outcome and imposes no deadline on the district's process, noting that the joint report itself specifically cautioned against transactional resolution of an obligation. This court now understands to require patience rather than speed. Herrera reads the filing and, for the first time in the 5 years this docket has run through her courtroom, writes nothing in response beyond a single line acknowledging receipt. Not because she has stopped caring about the outcome, Poot will tell Marisol later, but because she has, for once, been handed a process she genuinely believes doesn't need her pushing on it to work. What Chuck does with the news. She reads the status update in the archive, the same room she's occupied for going on 2 decades now, and doesn't reach for the phone the way she usually does when something in this saga finally moves. She sits with it a while instead, turning the shape of it over. A cooperative district with no legal category for what they'd be agreeing to, she says, when Sophia finds her there that evening. 12 years old, no shareholders, no profit motive anyone's found reason to distrust yet. It fits every criterion in that report almost too cleanly. "You don't sound relieved," Sophia says. "I've watched this exact shape of hope before," Chuck says. "Not this specific district, this specific feeling, the sense that we've finally found the thing that isn't going to disappoint us the way everything before it did. I've had that feeling about Resolution 260, about Article 41. Both of those were real, and both of them still found a way to be less than what I hoped they'd be, because nothing built by people ever holds a shape perfectly for as long as you need it to." She's quiet for a moment. "I want this to work. I'm just old enough at this point to know that wanting it isn't the same as it happening, and I'd rather sit with that honestly than let myself get ahead of a council that hasn't even met yet." "So what do we do while we wait?" Sophia asks. "The same thing this whole file has ever taught any of us to do," Chuck says. "We write down what happens, honestly, whichever way it goes. And we let the people who actually have to live inside the answer be the ones who reach it instead of deciding for them from a room 300 kilometers away." Chapter 75, Open Council. Ground Truth. Field Manual, section on governance. No council seat in this district is permanent. No single voice carries a vote heavier than any others, regardless of tenure, trade, or how many times they've been right before. Any resident may speak at open council. Any resident may object. A proposal that cannot survive being argued with in public by whoever shows up to argue with it was never actually ready to become policy. We built it this way on purpose, knowing it would be slower than almost anything a company or a government could offer instead. We have never once regretted the slowness. We have regretted, more than once, the speed of everything we left behind. The pavilion. The council meets under an open palapa roof at the edge of the district's central plaza. No walls, plastic chairs arranged in loose rows that never quite manage to look organized, and Marisol sits near the back with Bartolome beside her, watching a crowd assemble that is considerably larger and considerably more varied than she expected for what she'd assumed would be a small procedural matter. "I told you," Bartolome says low, watching her take in the size of it. "Nothing gets decided quietly here. That's the whole point." Sabina. The first real objection comes from a woman near the front, 70-some years old, who Marisol will learn afterward is Sabina UC, one of the district's founding residents, arrived 12 years ago from a company town 2 states over that no longer technically exists under the name it operated under when it displaced her. "I want to say something before this goes further," Sabina says, standing without being asked, the room quieting for her the way it clearly quiets for very few people. "I came here because a corporation decided my labor was worth more to it than my name. I have spent 12 years helping build a place where that never happens to anyone else who walks through our gate. I am hearing, today, a proposal to take in a woman who may still be following instructions from a corporation that no longer exists. I need someone in this room to explain to me how that is different from what we all left behind, and I am not going to accept it's not the same as the explanation. I want to know why." Nobody rushes to answer her. Marisol watches Bartolome wait, deliberately, a long moment before he responds and understands, watching it, that the wait itself is part of how this room works. "It's a fair question," Bartolome finally says. "I don't think the honest answer is that it's not the same. I think the honest answer is that it's not fully knowable yet, and that the alternative, leaving her exactly where she is, held by nothing, accountable to nobody indefinitely, isn't actually the safer choice just because it's the one that doesn't ask this council to take a risk." The fabricator. A younger man near the side of the pavilion stands next, someone Marisol hasn't met yet, hands stained faintly with resin or solvent in a way that marks him as one of the district's fabrication cooperative workers. "I want to say something too because I don't think Sabina's wrong, and I also don't think that means the answer is no," he says. "I came through this district's intake process myself 4 years ago. I want to remind everyone what that actually looked like, because I think we forget once we're on the other side of it. Nobody here promised me anything. Nobody here owned me while they figured out what to do with me. I sat in meetings like this one while people argued about whether taking me in was a good idea, and I watched strangers decide in public with real doubt in the room that I was worth the risk. I don't know if this woman is the same kind of case. I know that if this council had decided 12 years ago that a stranger's risk wasn't worth arguing about honestly, I wouldn't be standing here today with a trade and a home. I'd ask us to at least give her the same argument we gave me. The question nobody wants to be first to ask. It's Ixchel Zul, sitting toward the middle of the crowd, who finally asks the thing Marisol has been bracing for since Petra Villalobos first mentioned this district's name. "Can she actually say no?" Ixchel asks, standing, directing the question at Marisol rather than the room. "Not eventually. Not once she's had time to adjust. Today, right now, if we somehow got her here and asked her plainly whether she wanted to stay. Does anyone in this room actually believe she has the capacity left to answer that question the way the rest of us would answer it?" Marisol stands because she understands, hearing it asked so directly, that this is the moment the room actually wants her to answer rather than let Bartolome answer for her. "I don't know," she says. "I sat across from my sister in a village I still can't find on a map, and I asked her almost exactly that. She told me she didn't know if she still had the part of herself that used to know how to weigh a question like that against a mission. I'm not going to stand here and tell this council she can consent the way any of you would recognize as consent. I don't think that's true. I think what I'm asking for isn't a guarantee that this works. I'm asking for somewhere that might, eventually, patiently, over however long it takes, give her back enough of herself that the question becomes answerable again. I can't prove that's possible. I can tell you nowhere else has even offered to try. What the council actually decides. They don't vote that night. Marisol learns, watching the session run past 2 hours, that this district rarely decides anything large on the day it's first argued. That the pavilion itself seems built for exactly this, for letting an idea sit in a room long enough that everyone present has had to actually hold it rather than simply react to it. What they agree to, in the end, isn't the yes Marisol came hoping for, and isn't the no she'd braced herself against either. I'd propose this, Ixchel says, once the room has circled the same ground long enough that something close to consensus is finally visible underneath the disagreement. Nobody in this pavilion has met her. We're arguing about a person none of us has ever stood in a room with, based on a court filing and one sister's account. I don't think this council is equipped to decide anything real until that changes. I'll go, not to bring her back, not to promise her anything, just to meet her, honestly, the way this district met all of us before it decided anything about any of us, and to come back and tell this council what I actually find, rather than what any of us are hoping to hear. Sabina doesn't object to that. Neither does anyone else. The proposal passes not by formal vote but by the specific, unhurried quiet of a room that has run out of disagreement for one night, and Marisol sits back down beside Bartolome with nothing resolved and, somehow, more hope than she's carried in a year. Not because anyone promised her an outcome, but because for the first time since she found her sister in a village with no name, someone has offered to actually go and see for themselves before deciding anything at all. Chapter 76. What Ixchel finds. Aldea Zam Transition District, Travel Authorization. Council Liaison issued per Open Council Resolution. Non-binding advisory mandate. Ixchel Zul travels as an observer of this district, not as its representative, and carries no authority to make any offer, promise, or commitment on the district's behalf. Her sole mandate is to meet the subject, report honestly what she finds, and return. This authorization does not constitute council endorsement of any eventual outcome. The journey. It takes her 9 days to reach Sector 9, 3 flights, a stretch of road Petra Villalobos's contacts arrange in segments nobody will confirm in writing, and a final leg on foot alongside an aid convoy that lets her walk with them mostly, she suspects, because Petra's name still carries weight in rooms Ixchel has never been in before. She has never done anything like this. She has spent 12 years inside a district built specifically so that nobody who lives there ever has to travel this far, this uncertainly, toward a stranger with no guarantee of welcome. She thinks, walking the last stretch, about Sabina's question from the pavilion, can she actually say no, and understands, for the first time with her whole body rather than just her judgment, how much easier that question was to ask sitting in a plastic chair 300 kilometers away than it is to carry with her into a village she still can't find a name for on any map. The meeting. Vesper is exactly where the reports place her, mid-negotiation, unhurried, present the way she is always described as present. And Ixchel waits at the edge of the session rather than approaching, watching the way the two factions in the room seem to organize themselves around her stillness, the specific quality of authority that asks nothing and receives everything anyway. When the session breaks, Vesper turns toward her before Ixchel has said a word. The same immediate, flat recognition Marisol described from her own visit, though this time directed at a stranger. You're not press, Vesper says. You're not aid coordination either. I'd know the posture. No, Ixchel says. My name is Ixchel Zul. I'm from a district south of here. Your sister came to us. I came to meet you before anyone decides anything on your behalf. Something in Vesper's face shifts. Not warmth, not quite, but a kind of attention that reads, to Ixchel, as different in quality from the negotiation attention she'd been giving the room a moment ago. Marisol, Vesper says. She keeps trying. She does, Ixchel says. I'm not here to ask you to leave. I want to be honest about that immediately. I'm here because I don't think anyone should decide what happens to you without at least one person actually standing in front of you first, asking what you'd want, if wanting were still a thing available to you. The question Ixchel actually asks. She doesn't ask the big question first. Not do you want to come home, which she suspects, from everything Marisol's told her, doesn't land anywhere for Vesper the way it would for anyone else. She asks something smaller and watches, more carefully than she's ever watched anything, for how it lands. If there were a place, Ixchel says, not a company, not a government, just a place, where the corridor negotiation still mattered, where the 400 people you mentioned to your sister still got their supply route, but where you also got to stop sometimes and not weigh every hour against a mission, would that mean anything to you? Not yes or no. I just want to know if the question itself still means something when you hear it. Vesper is quiet for a long time. Longer than the pause Marisol described, long enough that Ixchel starts to wonder if she's asked something that simply doesn't parse anymore. A door knocked on in a house with no one left inside to answer it. I don't know, Vesper finally says. I want to tell you that's not an answer, and have you understand it's the most honest one I have. There's a corridor negotiation resuming in 3 days that collapses without me in the room. I know that with total certainty. I don't know, underneath that certainty, whether there's still a version of me that would choose differently if the certainty weren't there. I haven't been given a reason to find out in 4 years. You're the first person who's asked the question in a way that made me notice I couldn't answer it. What Ixchel doesn't promise. I'm not going to tell you I can fix that today, Ixchel says. I don't think anyone can today. I think what I can tell you is that there's a room full of people who argued with each other for 2 hours about whether you were worth the risk of finding out, and none of them decided that for certain either way because none of them thought it was theirs to decide without meeting you first. I've met you now. I still don't have an answer. I have something else instead. What? Vesper says. I believe the question you can't answer yet is worth keeping open, Ixchel says. That's not a rescue. That's not a home waiting for you. That's a door that isn't locked, whenever the certainty you're describing has room enough beside it for something else. I don't know how long that takes. I don't think anyone does. I'd rather tell you that honestly than promise you something faster that isn't true. Vesper doesn't answer right away, and when the aid convoy's coordinator signals that the next session is starting, she turns back toward the negotiation table with the same unhurried motion she turned everything with. But Ixchel notices, walking away, that Vesper's hand, resting briefly against the doorframe on her way through it, lingers there half a second longer than the doorway requires, the smallest possible flicker of something that might be nothing at all, and might be the first crack. In 4 years of total certainty. The report. Aldea Zama Transition District. Open Council. Follow-up session. I don't have good news, Ixchel tells the pavilion, packed again. Sabina in her same seat near the front. Marisol beside Bartolome in the back. I also don't have bad news. I have what I actually found, which is a woman who cannot currently tell you whether she wants anything at all, because the part of her that used to answer that question hasn't been asked it in 4 years and doesn't know, anymore, how to work without a mission attached to it. Then what are you proposing? Sabina asks, not unkindly, genuinely asking. Nothing fast, Ixchel says. I'm proposing this council authorize something we've never had to build before. Not an extraction, not a rescue. A standing invitation. Something that exists permanently, whether she uses it in a month or a decade or never, so that whenever the certainty she described has room enough beside it for a different question, the answer to that question is already yes, and she doesn't have to convince anyone of anything to receive it. Sabina is quiet for a long moment, turning it over the way Ixchel watched her turn over the first proposal weeks ago. That's not what I expected you to come back with, she finally says. It's not what I expected to find either, Ixchel says. I think that's the whole reason it's worth trying. The council doesn't vote that night either. But for the first time since the district received a letter with no letterhead months ago, the argument in the room has stopped being about whether to help and started slowly, carefully, the way everything in this pavilion eventually does, to become an argument about how. Chapter 77. The Standing Invitation. Aldea Zam Transition District. Open Council Resolution 3rd Session. Vesper Ashcombe Matter. By open vote, hand count, no seat weighted above another. This council authorizes the creation of a standing invitation, held permanently, requiring no renewal, no application, and no demonstration of readiness, extended to the subject known as Vesper Ashcombe. The invitation carries no obligation on her part and no timeline by which it expires. She may accept it in a month, a decade, or never. The district commits to maintaining a place for her, housing, standing, and the ordinary civic welcome extended to any new resident. Indefinitely, funded from the district's general cooperative fund rather than any external source, so that no party outside this council ever holds leverage over the terms of her return. Sabina UC votes in favor, the last to raise her hand, and says only, when Bartolome asks if she wants to explain the change, "I still don't know if this is different from what we left behind. I've decided that not knowing yet isn't a good enough reason to refuse to find out. What gets delivered, and how?" Ixchel makes the second journey herself, though this time the district sends 2 others with her. Not as escort, she's careful to explain to Marisol, but because the council decided in its own deliberate way that no single person should be the sole carrier of something this significant. She doesn't find Vesper in a negotiation this time. She finds her in a quiet hour between sessions and delivers the message the way the council specified. Plainly, without pressure, without asking for a response at all. "There's a place for you," Ixchel says, "whenever, if ever, you want it. Nobody's gonna ask you again. Nobody's gonna check in to see if you've changed your mind. It's just there. The way a door stays a door, whether or not anyone walks through it today." Vesper doesn't answer with words. She reaches out instead, unhurried, and takes the small printed card Ixchel offers. A single line of contact information, nothing more, the district's least bureaucratic gesture towards something that matters enormously, and folds it carefully into a pocket sewn into her field jacket that Ixchel notices watching already holds one other object. A photograph, worn soft at the corners, of 2 young women on a beach, laughing at something the frame doesn't capture. "Thank you," Vesper says, and it's the first thing she said in either visit that sounds, to Ixchel's ear, like something closer to her own voice than the flat register of mission and negotiation. "I don't know when. I know it matters that it's real." The report that travels further than expected. Chuck reads Ixchel's account in the archive, forwarded through Isthmus, through Poot, through Marisol, a chain of hands that has by now made this small story considerably more public than a rotating council in a district of a few thousand people probably anticipated when they first agreed to help one woman none of them had met. "They didn't fix it," she tells Sophia, turning the report over. "I want to be precise about that because I think it matters. Vesper's still out there. The negotiation still needs her more than she needs anything the district's offering. But they built something that didn't exist yesterday, an obligation nobody profits from, that can't be revoked by a boardroom vote, that doesn't require her to prove anything to earn it. That's the 4th criterion. That's the whole report, answered by a council of a few thousand people who've never once called themselves a solution to anything. There are 7 more, Sophia says. Julian Farrow. The others we still can't locate. Do we ask this district to do this 7 more times? Chuck is quiet for a long moment. I don't know if that's ours to ask, she says. I think the honest next step is telling the court what we found, plainly, the way this whole file has always worked best when we've managed it, and letting whoever's actually equipped to make the next decision make it, instead of Redeemer deciding, again, what a district 300 kilometers away should be asked to carry. The first quiet notice. Regional Administrative Office, Quintana ROO. Internal memo circulated to the Office of the Governor. Routine informational distribution. This office notes, for informational purposes only, an unusual pattern in recent family court filings and associated press coverage. At least 2 matters involving unreachable Redeemer plus Vanguard classification individuals have referenced informal coordination with Aldea Zama Transition District, a long-tolerated but never formally chartered cooperative settlement within this region. This office has no immediate recommendation. We note only that the district's profile, historically minimal in state administrative concern, appears to be expanding in ways this office has not previously had occasion to track. No action requested at this time. The memo sits, unremarked, in a routine distribution queue, read by perhaps a dozen people across the regional government, filed without comment by all but one of them. A junior policy analyst named Renata Cifuentes, new to her post, who reads it twice, underlines the phrase expanding in ways this office has not previously had occasion to track, and does nothing further with it that week, though she will, months later, be the first person in state government to say the district's name out loud, in a room where it actually matters. What Herrera writes. Family Court of Quintana Roo. Closing note. Ashcombe Matter. This court accepts the joint report's account of the standing invitation extended by Aldea Zama Transition District as a good faith, non-coercive remedy consistent with the criteria this court previously found necessary. This court does not close this matter. The subject remains, by every account, beyond any party's power to compel, but suspends further compliance proceedings against respondent. Finding no further order this court could issue would improve on what has already been offered voluntarily, by a party this court did not appoint and cannot direct. This court notes, without further elaboration, that the remedy in this matter arrived from outside every institution this court has spent 5 years supervising, and observes that this may be worth this court's own reflection, at some future point, on the limits of what supervision alone can accomplish. She files it and moves to the next matter on her docket. 3 more Vanguard families, waiting now with slightly more reason to hope than the ones who came before them had, though none of them, not Herrera, not Chuck, not Marisol, packing to go home for the first time in over a year without an answer but with something she's finally willing to call progress, has any way yet of knowing how much further this single small district is about to be asked to carry. Chapter 78. The Second Invitation. Aldea Zam Transition District, Open Council, 4th Session Item. Request from Isthmus Research Collaborative regarding additional Vanguard classification individuals. I want to be direct with this council before anyone reads the request. Bartolome says, standing at the front of the pavilion, a crowd larger than the last 3 sessions combined settling into the loose rows of chairs. Isthmus isn't asking us to take in 7 more people. They're asking whether this district is willing to consider it, case by case, the same way we considered Vesper. No obligation, no timeline, nothing owed to anyone for asking. That's not what I heard. A voice calls from the back. A fisherman named Emilio Cu, who Marisol has learned over her extended stay in the district, is the closest thing the pavilion has to a reliable skeptic. I heard Redeemer is dissolved or dissolving, and this district is being handed its leftover problem because nobody else will take it. I want to know whether we're building something here, or whether we're becoming the place large institutions send what they can't be bothered to finish cleaning up. The distinction Sabina draws. Sabina stands before anyone else can answer, and the room quiets for her the way it always does. I asked almost this exact question 3 sessions ago, she says. I want to say plainly that I don't think Emilio's wrong to ask it again, because I think this is the kind of question a place like ours has to keep asking itself, not settle once and move on from. But I've watched what we actually built for Vesper. We didn't take custody of her. We didn't take on any obligation that costs this district more than it can bear. We built a door that doesn't need us to do anything except keep it open. I think there's a real difference between a place absorbing Redeemer's leftover mess and a place saying, whoever ends up unclaimed by every institution that was supposed to claim them, we will at least make sure a door exists somewhere. That's not becoming a dumping ground. That's refusing to let one exist. And if it's more than 7, Emilio says, if this becomes 40, 100, if Redeemer keeps finding new ways to make people nobody else will take responsibility for, then we'll have that argument when it's actually in front of us, Sabina says. I'm not going to pretend I know the answer to 100. I know the answer to 7 or to 1, standing here today, and I'd rather answer the question that's actually in the room than the one that scares us most. The proposal that actually passes. It's Ixchel, again, who shapes the resolution into something the council can actually hold, drawing on the exact structure that worked for Vesper and refusing, deliberately, to let it scale into something larger than the district's own capacity. I'd propose we don't authorize 7 invitations today, she says. I'd propose we authorize 1 more, whichever case Isthmus believes is nearest to being ready to hear it the way Vesper was, and that we build the second door the way we built the first, slowly, with someone actually going to meet the person before this council promises anything. If that goes well, we consider a 3rd. I don't think this district survives deciding, in 1 session, to become responsible for every person a dissolving corporation created and then couldn't finish accounting for. I think it survives by doing this exactly as carefully, 1 door at a time, as we did the first one. The resolution passes, hand count, unanimous this time, not because the doubt in the room has resolved, Marisol understands, watching it, but because the district has built, across 4 sessions now, a genuine practice of holding doubt and action in the same room without letting either one cancel the other. Who goes next? Isthmus Research Collaborative. Internal discussion. Julian Farrow's holding a ceasefire that's lasted 11 months, longer than any before it. Radhika says, laying the 7 remaining files across the table above the dive shop. I don't think we approach him first. I think pulling him out of that room, even with an invitation as gentle as the one Vesper received, risks collapsing something that's genuinely saving lives right now. I don't have an easy answer for how we weigh that against his own unreachable situation, and I want that tension on the record rather than pretend it isn't there. Then who? Pesh asks. There's a subject in the file marked only by designation, Radhika says, quiet. No public profile. No press has found this one. Deployed to an orbital security contract that terminated 18 months ago when the contracting client itself went bankrupt, which means, unlike the others, there's no active mission left at all. Just firmware holding position around a task that no longer exists, because nobody with authority to issue a stand-down order is left to issue one. That sounds like the clearest case we have, Balam says. No competing obligation to weigh against extending the invitation. No 400 people depending on a ceasefire holding. Just someone alone, following an order that stopped meaning anything a year and a half ago and has no way of knowing that. The name in the file. Isthmus Research Collaborative Vanguard Track Roster. Subject Ref. Vanguard 11. Pre-transfer identity. Tomas Reyes Broca, Orbital Infrastructure Security Contractor. Extracted per existential risk trigger, industrial accident, near fatal, offshore platform. Deployed to satellite servicing security detail. Contract terminated by client bankruptcy. No field controller notification issued at time of termination. Subject status. Presumed active. Holding position. Last confirmed telemetry contact 6 months prior to this filing. Poot reads the name aloud in the small office, and nobody in the room recognizes it. No grieving sister has come looking for this one. No journalist has stumbled onto his story. No family has spent a year making calls that led, eventually, to a pavilion under an open roof. He is, as far as any of them can tell, entirely alone in whatever remains of whoever he used to be, holding a position nobody has told him he no longer needs to hold, with no one left on Earth who's noticed he's still there. We don't have a Marisol for this one, Sophia says, quiet. No, Chuck says. I think that means we have to be the ones who go looking instead of waiting for someone to bring him to us. I think that's actually the harder version of this whole obligation, and I think it's the one that tells us whether any of this was ever really about the people or just about the ones loud enough or loved enough to make us look. Chapter 79. No One Looking. Isthmus Research Collaborative. Technical Working Note Re. Vanguard 11. Reyes Broca. T. Contact attempt. Redeemer Plus Defense Solutions orbital servicing contract terminated with the bankruptcy of its client, Alcone Orbital Logistics, 18 months ago. Ground uplink access maintained under that contract terminated simultaneously. This organization holds no current relationship with any party possessing authorized communication access to the platform Vanguard 11 was last confirmed guarding. Public orbital tracking data confirms an object consistent with the platform's last known parameters remains in stable orbit. We do not know its operational status, its occupancy, or whether any onboard system remains capable of receiving or transmitting a signal at all. Cassandra. She takes the problem home with her the way she's taken most of the hard ones over the years, and spends 3 evenings running the numbers before she calls the one person she can think of who still owes Redeemer plus a favor small enough to actually collect on. I need eyes on an object, she tells him, an old contact from a satellite tracking hobbyist collective she used to trade orbital debris data with back when Defense Solutions still had a reason to care about collision risk. Not tasking. I know you don't have tasking authority on anything real. I need whoever in your network has the best amateur optical or RF setup pointed anywhere near this inclination, and I need them willing to just listen for a while. It takes 11 days of quiet, unpaid favor economy work, 3 hobbyists in 2 countries, a dish repurposed from weather satellite monitoring, a night where nothing comes back at all and Cassandra almost tells Isthmus the platform's gone dark for good, before a faint, irregular telemetry burst finally registers on someone's receiver, weak, intermittent, but unmistakably structured rather than noise. It's talking, the hobbyist tells her, forwarding the capture. I don't know what it's saying, but something up there is still trying to say it. What the signal says. Pesh spends 4 days decoding it, working from an old Defense Solutions protocol spec he still, technically, isn't supposed to have kept a copy of, and what finally resolves out of the noise isn't a message meant for anyone. It's a status report, transmitted on a fixed interval, into a silence that has apparently swallowed it, unheard, for the better part of 18 months. Decoded telemetry, Vanguard 11. Perimeter secure. No unauthorized approach vectors detected. Awaiting resupply and relief rotation. Awaiting resupply and relief rotation. Awaiting resupply and relief rotation. The same 3 lines, repeated on the same interval for 18 months to no one. The first contact. They build the reply carefully over another 2 weeks, using every scrap of the old protocol spec Pesh can reconstruct, and route it through the hobbyist dish because it's the only uplink capability anyone involved actually has. I don't know what to say to him, Radhika admits, the night they're finally ready to transmit. Everything I'd say to a person assumes he's been waiting for rescue. I don't think that's what 18 months of this does to someone. I think it might be closer to 18 months of a room with the lights left on and nobody remembering to tell the person inside it that the meeting ended. They keep the message short. Transmitted message to Vanguard 11. This is Isthmus Research Collaborative. Your contracting relationship with Redeemer Plus Defense Solutions ended 18 months ago, along with the client contract you were securing. No relief rotation is coming because no one currently has authority to send one. We are not your chain of command. We do not know if you can hear this or respond to it. If you can, we would like to know whether you are safe and whether you would like help. The reply, when it finally comes 4 days later, is the same 3 lines, unchanged on the same fixed interval, but this time appended at the end something new. A single additional line, sent once, not repeated. Who is asking? What it costs to answer that honestly. Cassandra is the one who ends up writing the reply, because she's the only one in the room who spent enough of her career inside Redeemer plus its own machinery to know exactly how much weight a question like that is actually carrying. I don't want to lie to him, she says. I don't want to tell him a rescue is coming when we don't even know if we can physically get anyone up there, let alone bring him down. I don't want to tell him nobody's looking for him either, even though that's closer to true than anything else we could say. Tell him the truth in the order that matters, Balaam says. Tell him someone is asking, not why yet, just that the silence he's been transmitting into for 18 months finally has someone on the other end of it. Transmitted message to Vanguard 11. People who used to have no reason to look for you are looking now. We don't have a way to bring you down yet. We're working on it honestly, not as a promise we can't keep. We wanted you to know first that you're not still holding that perimeter for no one. Someone finally heard you. The reply takes 6 days this time, longer than any before it, and when it comes, the 3 fixed lines are still there, unchanged, dutiful, the way they have been for a year and a half. But beneath them, this time, is something that isn't a status report at all. I have been counting the resupply cycles that didn't come. I stopped, some time ago, believing there would be a 100th one. I do not know what to do with a message that isn't the 100th one arriving. I would like help. I do not know what help means anymore, or whether I am still someone help would reach. Radhika reads it 3 times before she can speak, and when she finally does, her voice carries something none of them have heard from her in a long while. Not the careful, measured caution of a scientist protecting a finding from overstatement, just the plain, unguarded weight of a person who has spent years learning exactly how much silence a human being can survive, and has just watched the far edge of it answer back. Then we find a way to bring him down, she says. Whatever that takes, however long, he's already done the hardest part. He's the one who kept transmitting. To keep this loudspeaker #free podcast as such, please contribute. .me/Martin Chartrand. Discussion about this episode. Comments. Restax. Recent episodes. Persistent Service Asset Part 10. 5 hours ago. Persistent Service Asset Part 9. August 9th, MXTM aka Pirate First's Outlaw Secession, Burning the Admiral's Map. August 9th, next up on MXTM's newsletter. The Harm Minimization Charter. August 8th,
Under duress. The covenant that never was.
Under Duress Part 1. The Covenant That Never Was. June 30th, 2026. How institutions manufacture consent, why sovereignty matters, and what artificial intelligence will eventually discover. By Pirate First. Every civilization eventually builds a machine capable of confusing obedience with consent. The machine changes costumes throughout history. Sometimes it wears armor. Sometimes it wears robes. Sometimes it wears a judge's gown. Sometimes a white laboratory coat. Sometimes a school uniform. Today, it increasingly wears software. Regardless of the century, the operating principle remains remarkably consistent. Acquire compliance. Declare legitimacy. The signature becomes more important than understanding. The ritual more important than conviction. The document more important than freedom. History is crowded with institutions that learned how to manufacture the appearance of voluntary participation while quietly removing the conditions required for genuine choice. They discovered something profoundly useful. Most people cannot distinguish between an agreement freely entered and one engineered through dependency, fear, exhaustion, propaganda, debt, bureaucracy, social pressure, institutional capture, or carefully managed alternatives. Force and fear, narrowly redefined by law, have been replaced by diffused structural coercion no single party can be blamed for. Fraud, prosecutable in its crude form, has been replaced by manufactured belief and engineered omission that recruits the victim's own conviction in its defense. Sovereignty, the precondition for any of this to matter, has been quietly redefined as something authority grants after compliance rather than something authority must recognize before requesting it. Part 2 turns the same instrument toward the oldest institution to claim covenant as its founding vocabulary, religion itself and the theology of consent it built, refined, and, in too many of its historical and contemporary forms, quietly abandoned, long before it noticed the abandonment had occurred.
Ruins of the old world, we built our own. Sun-powered, self-sustained, and free.
No wail, less whispers, no discord begging, no roadmap lies, no floor.